Tien isn't going to last the week. That was the first sentence I heard in my second life. No system chime, no heavenly voice, no glowing tutorial. Just some middle-aged man standing 6 feet away, discussing my expiration date like I was a fish going bad on a counter. I opened my eyes. 3 men stood in front of a chair. I was in the chair. My hands were on the armrests, and they looked like something dug out of a dry riverbed. Knuckles like walnuts, skin like paper somebody had crumpled and then tried to smooth back out. I tried to lift one. It got about 2 inches up and quit. Cool. Very cool. Other people transmigrate into the young master of a holy land. The prodigy with the divine bloodline. The guy with the sword and the jawline. I got the family elder who was already halfway into the ground, in a body that was actively giving up on me while I sat in it. The 3 men were arguing about the end of the world, which apparently was a Tuesday. The big one was Meng Quan, 6.5 feet of shoulders with a scar running down his jaw, the family's 3rd brother, in charge of anything that involved hitting. Tien wanted to open the gates and take in refugees. Drought everywhere, rebellions everywhere, the dynasty coming apart at the seams. So grab bodies, grab land, grab everything while everyone else is panicking. The thin one was Li Wei, 2nd brother, who held about 70% of the family money and had the personality of a locked drawer. His argument was shorter. Whoever sticks their head up first gets it removed. And in the middle stood Sun Ren, head of the Luo family, who had said absolutely nothing. Tien dragged his brothers in here specifically so the decision would land on the old man in the chair instead of on him. That old man being me, a guy who had been alive in this world for approximately 90 seconds. I waved them out. The hand only made it a few inches, but they scattered like I'd thrown something. And then alone, the panel came up. Lifespan. 7 days. 7 days. I read it 4 times, and it stayed 7. This body had a week of fuel in the tank, and I'd inherited it at 100% depreciation. Under that, cultivation level. Bone refining, early stage, which in this world is roughly the tier of can open a jar without help. And under that, the thing that made me sit very still. Liang blood, 1,350. Safe limit, 135. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. It wasn't my energy, it was theirs. Every single person carrying the Luo name was a drop in that number. The panel had pooled my entire clan into 1 bar and handed me the tap. 10 points bought 1 day of life, 100 bought a rank, and the pool refilled about 50 a day all by itself, because the family kept doing the thing families do, which is eat, sleep, and wake up in the morning. So the obvious question arrived immediately, the way it would for anyone. Why not just crank the whole 1,350 right now, take the free 130 years, and go retire in a mountain somewhere? Because of that second number, safe limit, 135. Everything past it came out of people. Push far enough and the panel promised what it called uncontrolled events. And I did not need it spelled out. Uncontrolled events means grandma stops waking up. It means the pool gets smaller, permanently, and a smaller pool means a smaller me. The cheat was a farm, not a lottery. You don't eat the seed corn. So I spent 3 extra days, purely to time how fast it grew back. Then I sat there in the dark, in a body that creaked when I breathed, extending my sinful old hand into my own relatives. Sun Ren didn't even make it to the courtyard before he had to grab a pillar. His son found him there. Wen Tao, early 20s, white robes, one of those calm young men who pour tea while they explain how everyone in the room is going to die. Tien got his father sat down and laid it out in about 4 sentences. 2nd uncle holds the money. 3rd uncle holds the men. The family holds nothing except the reputation of one old man in a chair. The day that old man stops breathing, the Zhao family eats us. The officials pick over what's left. And the Luo name goes in a ledger somewhere as a footnote. Then he offered his father a choice. Take the bloodline into the mountains and live as hermits, keep everyone alive, lose everything else, or stay in Qingxi City and gamble the whole clan. You can't have both, he said. I liked that kid immediately. Across town, the Zhao family was already measuring my coffin. Chen Kai was their head, and he was not stupid, which made him a genuine problem. Tien had a physician on retainer, Old Zhou, who'd recently been made a named disciple of a Wandan sect branch and had developed the personality of a man who now knows one important person. Chen Kai asked him how long the Luo elder had. 1/2 month at the outside. Zhou's own apprentice mouthed off in front of the head of a great family, and Zhou made a show of scolding him, and Chen Kai swallowed it and smiled, because Zhou could brew body-tempering pills now, and you don't slap the man who makes the medicine. That was the whole shape of the world I woke up in. My family's continued existence was a rumor about a dying man, and the rumor had a date on it, and somebody had sold the date. The next morning I checked the bar, fully back, 30 points, regenerated in under half a day, out of nothing but my relatives having breakfast. So I spent 100, bone refining, middle stage, I want to describe the breakthrough as some cosmic experience, but honestly, it felt like the exact opposite of a hangover. Everything that hurt stopped hurting in a specific order, top to bottom. My spine unlocked, my hands closed all the way. I stood up out of that chair without using the armrests, and the sheer novelty of it almost knocked me over. I went for a walk. Sunren was at the gate. Tien watched me come down the steps, and I watched him do that thing where a man rubs his eyes with the heels of his hands. Yesterday I'd been a corpse with opinions. Today I had color in my face. I could see him land on the only explanation that fit. The last flare before the candle goes out. Sure. Let's go with that. The city was worse than the family. The market still had the shape of a market, but past it, in the streets where the drought had actually landed, I watched a man sell his daughter for 3 taels of silver and walk straight from the buyer to the gambling house without changing his stride. The girl didn't scream. That was the part that stayed with me. She was old enough to understand the transaction, and young enough that understanding it did nothing for her. I kept walking, which tells you something about what kind of person I am, and I'm not going to dress it up. Then a dozen men peeled off a wall and boxed in the rich old fellow walking alone. I didn't move, didn't have to. The Luo family keeps quiet men a few steps behind anyone important, and they came out of the crowd and went through that dozen like a comb through hair. The leader kept screaming his own title the entire time, the 9th Chief of Black Wind, the 9th Chief, as though the rank was a spell that would make the sword stop. It did not make the sword stop. Fine Black Wind, I said. Erase it. On the walk back, the gambler from earlier crawled out of the gambling house and grabbed my trouser leg to ask for a loan. 3 taels lighter, 1 daughter lighter, still shopping. I gave him a boot and kept going. Black Wind, when word reached them, had a very interesting meeting. Their chief, a big man called Huo Liang, grabbed his blade the second he heard one of his own had been killed. Then somebody said the name Luo. Tien asked which Luo. Somebody said one of the 4 great families of Qingshu City. Tien sat back down. We never had a 9th chief, he said. Remember that. Meanwhile, Chen Kai was teaching his son history. 300 years ago, there were 3 families in Qingshu. One held the markets, one held the gambling houses, and the Zhao held the bluestone veins. Then the Luo family arrived from somewhere else, found a stack of unsurveyed veins nobody had touched, and took a share of everything. Memorize every vein they hold, he told his son. Every single one, so that on the day the old man dies, we don't waste an afternoon deciding what to take. Back home, I was learning the least fun lesson of my new life. I trained. Properly. The family's fierce tiger strength technique, 3 full days of it, sunrise to collapse, the way the protagonist always does it in the stories. The panel showed me the result. My progress toward the next rank had gone from 185 to 170, not up, down. This body was burning down faster than any amount of sweating could rebuild it. 3 days of honest work had put me measurably further from where I started. The old man's flesh was a leaking bucket, and I'd been very diligently pouring water into it. Fine. Message received. Meditation is a hobby. The panel is the job. I dumped 30 into cultivation and 20 into days, which put my safe reserve at exactly 0, and sat there thinking about the only number that actually mattered. Not my level. The pool. 1,350 points, and every point of it was a person with the Luo surname, which meant the ceiling on my entire existence was, in the most literal sense, how many Luo there were, more relatives, more bar. I filed that under ideas I would absolutely be revisiting, and went to the library instead. I found 2 things there. The first was my grandnephew Xu Feng, a skinny kid with permanent bags under his eyes, hunched over a volume called Alchemy for Beginners, with the intensity of a man decoding scripture. I asked what he was researching. Tien said, and I want to be clear that he said this out loud, to an elder in a library, that he intended to develop an aphrodisiac pill and achieve financial freedom. I told him I'd heard everything starting from the word aphrodisiac. Tien did not stop researching it. I want that on the record now, because it becomes relevant approximately 100 times. The second thing was on the 3rd floor in the corner of a white jade cabinet, and it was a movement art rated a full tier above anything else the Luo family owned. Wind Shadow Step. Half the book was missing. The half that remained was so far above our level that reading it was like being handed the back end of a bridge. I took it anyway. On the way out, I passed Wen Tao, and he had circles under his eyes too. I haven't been sleeping, he said. Weak in the mornings. It isn't only me, it's most of the family. I did not look him in the eyes. I said something about the heat. The tap works. That's the thing. The tap works exactly as advertised, and every point I pull out comes from somewhere. And the somewhere has a name and a face and pours my tea. I was going to keep pulling. 7 days after everyone agreed I'd be dead, I wasn't, and it was causing problems all over town. Chen Kai's son came in with news. They'd located a bluestone vein about 300 meters long, the kind you build a generation on, except Meng Quan had already marched elite retainers out there and thrown the Zhao men off it. Chen Kai broke something expensive and then sat down to wait because his entire strategy still rested on a rumor with a date on it, and the date was slipping. And over at the Song family, the one that held the markets, they were playing chess and doing math. If the Luo fall, the balance of this city falls with them, old Song said. We should marry into them. His son made a face. The Luo family's daughter was sick. Everyone knew about the girl. Every full moon, the servants said. There were sounds from her room that you didn't ask about in the morning. She'll be dead in 3 months, his son said. 5 at the outside. The interests of the family come first, old Song said. We go in 3 days. I would like to say I stopped that on principle. I didn't. I was busy. I was busy because the first form of wind shadow step finally clicked and my speed tripled, and I was still riding the high of that when I glanced at the panel and saw the pool had dropped. 1,330. 20 points, gone, and not spent by me. It took me an embarrassing amount of time to work it out. A woman of the family had married out that week. Married out means she takes another name. Another name means she isn't a Luo, which means she wasn't in my pool anymore. I sat with that for a while, feeling like an accountant who just discovered a leak in a wall he built. And then I gave an order that changed the shape of the Luo family for the next 100 years, and I gave it for the pettiest possible reason. No daughter of the Luo family marries out, ever. If a man wants one of ours, he moves in, takes the name, and the children are Luo. Everyone assumed it was about protecting the girls. Very moving, very traditional. Sure, it was about the bar. The Song family came to propose 3 days later, exactly as scheduled, and it went beautifully for about 90 seconds. Then Sun Ren heard which daughter they wanted. His. The sick one. The one with the full moons. And he looked at the son's face while old Song was still talking, and whatever he saw there, that specific look people get when they're being generous about something they consider damaged goods, put him on his feet. Get out. Old Song tried the reasonable voice. Sun Ren was already walking them to the door. You'll remember this, Song said from the step, when the Zhao are cutting your family down. Afterward, Wen Tao gave his father the most useless verdict in history, delivered with total sincerity. As the head of the family, that was irresponsible. As a father, it was correct. That night I went and looked at the girl. Her name was Sun Jingyi. The family physician had already given his professional opinion, which was that she would die of the pain at the next full moon. And he'd given it in the corridor, in his outdoor voice, because that's the kind of physician he was. The room was cold, not cool. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with whatever was living in that child's chest. My breath came out white in her doorway in the middle of a drought. She was propped up on the pillows, white as the sheets, and when she saw me, her whole face lit up like I'd come to a birthday. Grandpa Yuanhai, she said, am I going to die? Every adult in that house had lied to her that week. I could see the lies stacked up in the room like furniture. Yes, I said, if nothing changes, at the next full moon. She thought about it. Then she smiled at me, and it was a real one, and it was worse than crying. Thank you for not lying to Jingyi. I had about 30 days. I'd like to tell you I cracked alchemy in a montage. I spent 3 weeks with Introduction to Alchemy and produced nothing but a headache and a new appreciation for how many novels had lied to me. In those books, the hero picks up alchemy between chapters. In real life, I couldn't get a fire to behave. Meanwhile, the Zhao stopped being subtle. Meng Chuan was camped at the 300-meter vein with his men, and his son Meng Baihei, a quiet, serious boy who noticed things, pointed out that the number of Zhao faces loitering around the ridge had roughly doubled in 2 days. His father waved it off. The boy sent word to the family anyway. Wen Tao brought it to his father with a different framing. They're testing us because they know the date. Old Zhou sold them the date. And when a man reaches for your property with one hand to see whether you'll flinch, there's exactly one correct response. I'd said the same thing that morning, almost word for word. They reach out one hand, we take one hand. They reach out two, we take two. Meng Quan waited for a cloud to cross the crescent moon and then went through the Zhao camp at the mine. Meng Baihei killed his first man that night. Took the head clean off, caught a spray of it across his mouth, and stood there tasting it. Sweet, he said later, with rust underneath. Tian waited to feel sick. Tian didn't feel anything at all. His father heard about it and shrugged. Tian's my son. Tian'll manage. By morning, there were dozens of Zhao dead in the dark, and not one of them had made it home to say so. Chen Kai got the report and destroyed a room over it, because the part that frightened him wasn't the bodies. It was that the ground showed no sign of a fight. Nobody had gotten a hand up. Tian still didn't attack. Tian was waiting for a dead man to have the decency to die, and then the dynasty walked in and made both of us irrelevant for a week. The order came down to Qingshu City with the word contribution on it, which is the word governments use when the honest word is available and less convenient. Every family donates, amount to be determined by how much the officials feel like taking. Wen Tao found out what the gambling house family had paid, 30,000 in gold, 100,000 in silver, and told his father to pay exactly the same, not less, not more, never be the cheapest name on the list. Better to cut off a piece of meat, he said, than to lose the whole body. The man doing the collecting was a commander named Guo Cheng, silver armor, very clean, standing next to a mayor who had stopped pretending to be in charge. They pay, Guo Cheng said, or we cut the clan down, kill until it's frightening. After that, the money brings itself. Tian was right, that's what I hate about it. Tian was completely right. 3 days and 3 nights. Anyone who hadn't paid or had paid late or had paid in a tone somebody disliked. Wen Tao stood at our gate beside me and went the color of paper, and I told him the only useful thing I had. In times like these, don't gamble. And somewhere in those 3 days, watching me watch a massacre with my hands behind my back, that kid worked out that the dying old man had been acting. Tian asked me straight out. Good question, I said. Don't ask it again. Tian was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, has anyone ever told you that you're terrifyingly sly? We both laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in this world. The soldiers looted for 3 days and left. And the city started counting what was gone, and the Zhao family started counting something else. They had a new advisor, a disgraced scholar named Shi Yan, formerly ranked first in the dynasty's examinations, now stripped of everything and looking for a horse to bet on. And his advice to Chen Kai was clean and cold and correct. Stockpile grain, raise a private army, and wait for your brother to finish gathering the bandits, because he's already halfway there. Chen Kai's brother had spent a year quietly assembling the Black Tiger stronghold, 5,000 men, 2,000 of them actual fighters. Against that, the Luo family had a few hundred retainers and 1 elder in a chair, so I bought my way up, 450 out of 500. I fed in the last 50 and broke the big rank, organ refining. I don't have a good comparison for it. The closest I can get is that the first 2 ranks felt like repairs, and this one felt like an argument. My whole body furious about something, tearing itself down and putting itself back with the parts in better places. Rage, ruin, and then a kind of rebirth, all inside about 40 seconds. Then the panel updated and I forgot to breathe. Lifespan, 20 plus years. I'd walked into this world with 7 days. Now I had 2 decades and they'd cost me a number, and the pool had jumped from 1,330 to 1,550 because the family was eating better, sleeping better, having children, and every one of those children was a coin in a jar with my name on it. I pushed Fierce Tiger strength from a third to full. 2 points bought 1%, which is the kind of exchange rate that makes you giggle alone in a courtyard. And when I finished, something enormous and red stood up behind my back and moved when I moved. My strength doubled outright. Wind Shadow Step went to 10%. Only 10. Even bought. That art fought me. Across the city, Xian finished his plan. Bring 2,000 Black Tiger fighters into Qingxi, lock the gates, seal the officials in their own residences, wipe out the Luo family in the confusion, sit down on the bluestone veins, and be the only people left standing when the dust cleared. Chen Kai's brother asked him 3 times what the chance of success was. 90%, Xian said. There is no 100% on this continent. They took the city in half an hour. 2,000 men, 50 ladders, a garrison of 300 elderly spearmen who evaluated the situation with admirable speed and evaporated. Fewer than 50 casualties. The gates shut behind them. They surrounded the mayor's residence and cut down the 2 men at the door as a demonstration. And the mayor, who had watched Guo Cheng rob his own city a month earlier without a word, folded in a single sentence. Submit or die, Tian submitted. Tian'd been rehearsing. Wen Tao came to me at a run, and he was the closest to panic I ever saw him. Should we move? I was reading Introduction to Alchemy, which I still could not understand, and I did not put it down. Do you know the difference between organ refining and bone refining? I asked him. No? Then here's a better lesson. To destroy something, first let it lose its mind. Let's see who else feels like joining the Zhao family this week. They came for us 2 days later. Chen Kai and his brother, both at the peak of bone refining, with 1,500 armored men behind them and the whole city already in their pocket. Meng Quan held the gate and held it well and was going to lose. The Zhao brothers started charging up the family's inherited technique, the one they only get to use once, where a man drives every drop of blood in his body into a single arm, and I did something first that I have never explained to anyone. I had the families old and sick gathered into the central courtyard, all of them, every relative too frail to hold a spear, brought to one place and settled down comfortably where nobody could get to them. Wen Tao worked out why. I watched him work it out. Tian looked at that courtyard full of harmless old people, and then at me, and something behind his eyes went very quiet and very still, and he never said a word about it for the rest of his life. Flowers in a greenhouse are pretty, I told him. They just don't survive weather. Let the pups train. Then I walked out the front gate. Not dead, I said. Surprised? Chen Kai's face did something complicated. Tien built 4 years of planning on a physician's estimate. I crossed the ground between us without either of them seeing me cross it. That's wind shadow step at 10%, which tells you what the other 90 would have been. And I put my palm against the brother's head. Not a strike. A pat. The sound was almost polite. Then there was no head. Chen Kai started screaming that it was a lie. Tien burned every drop he had for the bombardment fist, the whole inheritance in one punch, and I patted him too. 2 headless bodies in front of 1,500 men who had just been told this was a 90% proposition. I was going to give you another few days, I said. Why did you have to come to me? I clapped Wen Tao on the shoulder on my way back in. The rest is yours. Tien earned it inside the hour. 1,500 men surrendered, and Xian surrendered with them, in the middle of the crowd, in a plain coat, doing a perfect impression of a terrified clerk. The voice shook exactly right. The face did exactly the right amount of pleading. Wen Tao walked down the line, stopped in front of him, and took his head off in one motion. His uncle asked what the hell that was. His voice shook perfectly, Wen Tao said. His face was perfect. But underneath, his eyes were completely calm. Tien wiped the blade. And if I was wrong, what is one worthless life against the Luo family? Then the Song family arrived to congratulate the winners. They'd come to the Zhao compound with gifts, assuming they knew who'd won. Meng Chuan came out of the gate instead. Wen Tao was very cold and very polite. You came to welcome the Zhao? Meng Chuan helpfully. We're already killing everyone today. Let's do the song as well. Wen Tao pretended to think about it. Old Song went down on his knees on the flagstones and started bidding against himself. The markets. All of them. Half the family's total assets, and every book in the Song library. Wen Tao accepted with the pained expression of a man being unreasonably generous. Tien walked over there hoping for the markets. The Zhao family ended that week. Meng Quan went through the compound and left nothing standing that could hold a grudge. When he got to the children, he came back and asked what to do with them, and Wen Tao, who had cut a man's head off that morning for having steady eyes, put his hands behind his back and looked at the wall. You know me, he said. I'm soft-hearted. I'll leave first. And then he took the Zhao children into the Luo family, gave them our name, and put them in the schoolroom with everyone else's kids, and never once mentioned it again. I checked the panel that night out of pure professional curiosity. The pool had gone up. Turns out the tap doesn't care whose grandfather you killed. It only counts surnames. The next morning, I went to have a conversation with a physician. Old Joe received me the way a man receives a debt collector he's decided to bluff. Robes arranged, chin up. A named disciple of the Wandan sect, if you please, which in a city like ours was roughly equivalent to having a cousin in the capital. You told the Zhao family I was dying, I said. And if I did? I let that sit for a second because I wanted him to hear it out loud himself. You're a named disciple, I said, of one branch, of one sect, of a sect that has more branches than this city has streets. Do you honestly believe they would burn my clan to the ground over your life? I watched it land. That's the thing about people who borrow their courage. You don't have to beat them, you just have to send it back. Tien was on the floor before I finished the sentence. I gave him a month, triple the quality and triple the output of everything he brewed or die, and one more condition, which mattered more than the pills. Write down everything you remember about alchemy, everything, including the parts you don't understand. Then I went and collected the gambling houses. Meng Quan surrounded the Jing family compound, and the head of the Jing family, a man with a spine, explained the situation to his daughter while he waited to surrender. She was standing there with a red-tasseled spear and murder in her face, and he talked her down with arithmetic. 10 men at bone refining are nothing against 1 at organ refining, he said. If we had 2,000 men at bone refining, we wouldn't be sitting in this room. We'd be out there carving ourselves a kingdom. That sentence stayed with me for years. Tien was completely right, and everything I built afterward was basically an attempt to make it true. But first I needed to learn alchemy, and I had established that I could not, so I bought it. The panel had a profession tab. It had always had a profession tab. Alchemy, 1% for 50 points, and then 100, and then 200, doubling every step, which is the panel's way of telling you it thinks you're an idiot. I bought 2%. Buying a profession is not like leveling a body. It's like being handed somebody's entire life at once. The first percent took me half an hour to digest, sitting on the floor of my own courtyard with my hands over my eyes. The second took 2 hours, and I genuinely thought my skull was coming apart along the seams. But when I stood up, I knew where the fire went. 2 batches failed. The first one exploded, which is apparently traditional. The second went perfectly right up until the last moment and then collapsed into slag, which is somehow worse. The third one gave me 3 pills. I brought them to Sun Jingyi the night before the full moon. Her room was cold enough that the pill fogged in my palm. She was smaller than the last time. She looked at what I was holding and she didn't ask what it was, or what it did, or whether it was tested. Grandpa Yuanhai, I trust you, she said. And anyway, how much worse can it get? She swallowed it. I sat there for the length of 1 cup of tea, watching a child breathe, and I want to be honest with you, that is the longest I have ever sat anywhere. Then color came into her face. Not much, some. And the cold in that room, the cold that made my breath white in high summer, pulled back about halfway to the walls. She fell asleep normally, like a person. I stayed until she did. Full moon came. She screamed. But she was there in the morning. And she was there the morning after that, and the family physician came out of her room looking like a man whose entire education had just been insulted. The second thing I brewed was more selfish, and I want that on the record too, because the pattern matters. Blood replenishing pills. I made a batch and handed one to Sun Ren to test, and I forgot to tell him it dissolves in the mouth. Tian threw it back like a shot of liquor. For about 90 seconds I thought I had killed the head of my family in front of witnesses. Tian went red, then a color that isn't in the standard list. Then he made a noise like a kettle, and then he broke through a rank he'd been stuck at for 10 years. Tian came up off the floor at bone refining, late stage, with his eyes watering, and said the single most useful thing anyone said to me all year. Do you have more? I did the math that night. 1 pill, 1 man, 1 rank. Fine. But the panel didn't care about ranks. The panel cared about how much liang the family produced, so I stopped handing out pills. Instead, I had them dissolved into the spring water barrel in the main dining hall, every day, whole family, every meal, drinking diluted medicine, and not one of them asking why the water tasted faintly of iron and why everybody's grandmother had suddenly started walking to the market again. They ran to dinner like it was a festival. Daily regeneration went from 50 points a day to 100. I had doubled my own income by improving my family's quality of life, which I would like you to notice is exactly the same sentence as, I had improved my family's quality of life to double my income, and I have never been able to decide which one is true. Both. It's both. That's the whole story of my life in this world, if you want it in one line. Then the emperor died, and the price of everything went insane. The Great Wind Dynasty had one thing holding it together, and it was one old man on a throne. When he stopped breathing, the crown prince, Han Qingyu, sat down on the throne on schedule and with total legitimacy, and the second, third, fourth, and fifth princes all quietly went home to their own provinces, where their mothers' families happened to hold armies. Nobody rebelled. Nobody had to. Everyone just went to their corner and started counting soldiers. Li Wei smelled it first, which is what he was for. Grain tripled, then quintupled, then went up 10-fold and then 50-fold, and gold, which had been the entire basis of everything, turned into shiny metal that people were increasingly unwilling to trade dinner for. Convert everything, he said. All of it, today. We emptied the vaults into granaries, every coin, and within a season the currency people actually used in our streets wasn't gold at all. It was grain coupons, paper tied to a weight of food, which the great families issued, and everyone accepted because you can't eat a promise but you can eat what this one is pinned to. I'd like to claim credit. It was Li Wei. Give the man his due. Tian held the money for 30 years, and the one time it mattered, he moved in an afternoon. Meanwhile, Meng Baihe was going wrong. Meng Quan's boy, the one who took his first head at the mine and felt nothing. Tian shot up half a foot in a season. There was a faint red haze over his hair now if you looked at him from the side in bad light, and something in his eyes had started leaning forward all the time. I asked him what killing was like. It feels good, he said, not defiant, not boasting. Just answering a question honestly, the way you'd say a bath was warm. I went back and brewed tranquility pills that night. And I kept brewing them, and they helped, and they did not fix it. And then, finally, the thing I was actually good at. Talismans. I don't know why. I spent a month failing at alchemy and had to buy my way in. And then I picked up a brush and the talisman Dao opened for me like a door with no lock on it. It was, and I say this as a man who has been handed a lot of unearned things, the single most obnoxious stroke of luck of my entire life. The brush cost 50,000 in gold. I failed 1,000 times in a row. On the 1,001st attempt, I produced a Thunderstrike talisman that looked like a child's scribble. I took it out to a pile of rocks behind the compound and let it go. The sound arrived before I understood there'd been a light. When my eyes cleared, there was no rock pile. There was a scorch mark and a fine gray dust drifting sideways. And I stood there in it doing arithmetic, one talisman, one scribble on a piece of paper. The full power strike of a body-refining cultivator delivered by anyone at any range as many times as I felt like drawing. I want you to hold on to that number because it comes back. 2 weeks later, Guo Qing came back, not as a commander. The dynasty had stopped paying him, so he'd made the obvious career change and was now a bandit with 2,000 armored soldiers going door to door in the provinces to borrow food. Tian rode up to Qingxi City and did not recognize it. Tian robbed this city a year ago. It had been half empty then, sagging, quiet. Now the walls were higher, the fields outside were green in a drought, and there were more people going in than out. We let him in. When Tao sat down in the mayor's chair to receive him, which was its own kind of statement, Guo Qing started shouting about treason against the dynasty, and Meng Quan's men beat him for 3 hours. Between rounds, he'd get his breath and threaten us again, and the answer every time was the same 2 words. Keep going. Tian broke around the 3rd hour, offered his 2,000 men, offered himself. We threw him out instead, not because of the beating or the robbery or the treason, because of what his column had done getting here. They'd stripped every village on the road down to the dirt and poisoned the wells behind them, so nothing would grow for whoever came after. You can recruit a monster. Everyone recruits monsters. But you find out where a man's floor is, and if he doesn't have one, he'll be standing on yours eventually. We took Huang Lin next. Meng Chuan went with 30,000. The Huang family surrendered inside a day and survived intact. The head of their house told his son the only thing worth saying, which is that as long as you're alive, there's hope. The Kai and the Bai fought instead and stopped existing. 5 days, 1,000 of our men, 2 counties, and that's when the neighbors noticed us, 3 of them. The Huai River King, who was the 2nd prince and owned 8 counties and a dozen towns. The Chen, who were old, and the Tang, who grew the grain. The Tang family reacted first, and they reacted with the only weapon that mattered in a famine. They cut off every grain shipment into Qingxi City and Huanglin, all of it, at once. We had 3 months of food at our current growth rate, in a drought. With refugees still arriving at the gates every morning because we were the only place in 4 counties that was still letting people in. Which is roughly when a fortune teller walked up to my front gate with his son and announced that we were destined for greatness. His name was Sha Fan, Dao robe, feather fan, the face of a man who has never once paid for a meal. His son had a little braid and the expression of someone who has been dragged along on this exact scam in 11 different cities. The father's opening line was that after the Great Wind Dynasty falls, fortune returns to the Luo. And did we know that the Luo surname traces back to the Huai River? His son helpfully listed out loud everyone who had died shortly after believing his father's fortunes. Xia Fan gifted us half of a low-grade spirit stone. Half. The broken edge looked like something had chewed it. I let him in anyway, and I'll tell you exactly why. Tian had been in my courtyard for 4 minutes, and in that time, his eyes had gone twice to a servant girl nobody else in this family had ever looked at twice, and once, very briefly, to Meng Baihei, and on Baihei his face had changed. Whatever that man was, he wasn't a fraud. Tian was a fraud with something real underneath, which is the most useful kind of person there is. Then I heard about the horses. 50 Ink Jade Kirin, one of the 3 divine mounts of the dynasty, moving on a caravan from the Shu family of Wanshan to the Tang family, the Tang, who were currently starving us. I made 200 and some invisibility talismans, 10 minutes each. I explained the plan to Meng Quan. Tian stared at me. You want us to steal them? What an ugly word, I said. So you don't want the horses. Tian took 1 step backward with the stack of talismans already in his hands. I am willing to make this sacrifice for the family. The theft went beautifully, apart from 1 Kirin that played dead and nearly brought the whole camp down on us. 50 divine horses walked out of a guarded caravan in a line, invisible, in the dark, at a trot. I went out to look at them in the morning, running my hand down the flank of an animal worth more than most towns. Then I checked underneath. Every single one had been gelded. The Shu family had been selling these things for 300 years and had never once sold a breeding pair. They'd sold us 50 magnificent, priceless, entirely terminal horses. I stood in that stable at dawn and laughed until my ribs hurt. Meng Quan solved the grain problem in his own way, which was to take 1,000 men into Tang territory and behave like an eel with a grudge. Food, taken. Supplies, taken. Weapons and armor, which he described as a delightful surprise, taken. Tian didn't touch a single farmer because farmers are the ones who make more food next year, and my nephew was not a complicated man, but he was not a stupid one either. The Tang family assembled 50,000 soldiers to catch him. Tian was already home eating dinner. Sun Ren had been against the whole thing at the start. By the end of the month, he was asking every few days in a very casual voice when we were going borrowing again. That was also the season the monks arrived, gray robes and white robes in the outer city, moving through the refugee camps. Very gentle, very patient. Buddha is merciful to all, they said, and yet all of you suffer. And see, Qingxi City opened its gates to you, which means the Buddha led you here. Anyone who declined got frozen out by the converts, which is a much older technology than any of us like to admit. What made me leave them alone wasn't the preaching. It was that a white-robed one walked up on my blind side in a crowded street and I did not feel him coming. Those robes and those prayer beads swallowed a man's aura completely. I couldn't see who was behind them yet. So I watched, and I made 3,000 Thunderstrike talismans in a fortnight, and I waited. Then Feng Lin showed up with a job offer and an explanation, in that order. Tian was the head of the Wandan sect's Luoshan branch, small round man, spirit artifact cane, permanently exhausted. I'd walked into his branch's alchemy examination on a whim, sat down next to a man who had failed it 10 years running, and finished an entire refinement while my neighbor was still warming his cauldron. 20+ blood-replenishing pills, every one of them at the top of the mortal grade. The man next to me put down his ladle and looked at me the way you'd look at a dog that had started doing your taxes. Feng Lin offered me a deputy post on the spot, and when I didn't jump, he kept adding 10 low-grade spirit stones a month, a storage pouch with 3 cubic meters inside it, and a cauldron, a real one, lower yellow grade, the kind you don't buy on a salary, which he pushed across the table with the face of a man handing over his own child. Tian saved for it for years. I found that out later. Tian never mentioned it once. His branch was ranked 12th out of 13, and in that sect resources flowed by rank, so 12th out of 13 meant slowly starving on principle. With that cauldron, my success rate went from 1 in 20 to 1 in 5. And that's also where I learned the shape of the machine I'd walked into. 20% commission to the branch. 30% to the main sect. The main sect, which sat somewhere far away and did nothing, took nearly a third of every pill made by every alchemist under its name, forever, on the grounds that it was the main sect. I filed that away too. Then Feng Lin explained the monks. They weren't monks, they were demon monks, and the thing they fed on was faith itself. Power of faith, he called it. The more people believe, the stronger the monk gets. And the strength is real, and it comes for free, and it never stops as long as there are frightened people. In a famine year, in a city full of refugees. I looked out the window at my own outer city, where several thousand starving strangers were being very gently comforted every single day. And I understood that somebody had planted a farm in my city, and it wasn't growing wheat. We went east because 5 towns out there had gotten organized. They'd bundled themselves under the Long family and called it an alliance. And the Long had a secret, which was an old ancestor of their own, Mo Xiang, organ refining for 20 years, one step off the middle stage, and he had a very reasonable opinion about me. Their old man broke through half a year ago, he told his family. What exactly am I supposed to be afraid of? Meng Quan took 30,000 armored men, 50,000 in reserve, and 100,000 peasants to carry things. And then he did the one thing nobody expected, which was attack at high noon. The defenders had been standing on that wall in full armor since dawn. You could see the air moving off them. Our men had been drilled in that heat for 2 years because Meng Quan's idea of training was that comfort is a thing you do after. The exchange rate started at 1 of ours for 20 of theirs and settled around 1 to 10. Xia Fan stood next to me on the 3rd day, fanning himself, and said, I did tell you East Soil was not simple. I never said we would lose. Tian was looking at the city while he said it, not at the walls, above them. I never got him to explain properly. But that man could see something over a place that told him how it was going to end. And he was right about it more often than a fraud has any business being. On the 5th day, Mo Xiang came out onto the wall. Our forward general was at the late stage of bone refining and had 30 years of war on him. The old man reached out with one dry hand and put it through his chest. And I have gone over the reports with 3 witnesses and not one of them saw the arm move. Then he came down off the wall and went for the command tent. Xia Fan evaporated. Genuinely, one moment he was fanning himself, the next there was a fan on the ground. His only comment afterward was that when 2 men at organ refining fight, the people who die are at bone refining. Meng Quan burned 100 Thunderstrike talismans on him. The old man came out the other side of it on fire and running. Meng Quan let the other 200 go. When it was over, there was a crater where a section of the wall used to be, a smell nobody wanted to name, and one small round object lying in the ash, a protective spirit artifact. The cheap kind, the low end of the low grade, the sort of trinket a family gives a son who's leaving home. It had eaten 100 talismans before it failed. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers. And I understood, standing in that crater, exactly what my 3,000 pieces of paper were worth, and exactly what they weren't. Meng Quan gathered every family head from the 5 towns into one hall afterward and asked a simple question. Punish the ringleaders or clear the lot? Xia Fan said clear them. Meng Quan stood up, said, Sort it out yourselves. You want something, you pay for it, and walked out of his own conquest. The families who hadn't joined the alliance killed the families who had. It took about half an hour. They were bidding for seats on our ship and paying in each other. I got two useful things out of that campaign. The first was the ephemeral flower pill, second generation. The original was a monstrous thing. It burned a person's lifespan and their potential together, squeezed the whole future out of somebody, and converted it into strength today. I rebuilt it so it only took the potential. Only. Listen to me. Only. The sect valued it at 100 low-grade spirit stones, roughly 20 times any other pill of the same rank, and never once asked what was in it. The second thing was Meng Xiang. Tian had been our steward for 70 or 80 years. Bone refining, late stage, and that was the end of the road for him. He'd known it for decades and had made his peace with it the way old servants do, by getting very good at everything else. I told him what the pill would cost. All of your remaining talent. All of it, permanently. No second attempt, not ever. Tian swallowed it before I finished the sentence, and went straight through to organ refining, middle stage, in one step, at 80 years old, in a courtyard, still holding the water jug he'd come in with. Tian got down on the floor and put his forehead on the stones and said he had nothing in this life left to repay me with. I told him to get up. Tian didn't, for a while. That's the pill. That's what it does. It takes everything a person could have been and gives them everything they can be right now. And the people who take it are always the ones who've already stopped expecting a tomorrow. I have handed that pill out several hundred times since. I have never once had to talk anybody into it. Somewhere in there I met the boy. His name was Sunbo. 5 or 6 years old, no parents, one of about 40 children the family was raising in a wing of the compound because the drought had made orphans faster than anything else that decade. Tian was in a courtyard swinging a wooden sword. I watched him for a while, mostly because he was doing it badly. Then I came back at noon, and he was still doing it. Then I came back near dusk, and he was on the ground, out cold, with the sword still in his fist, and a servant carrying him inside, with the unbothered efficiency of someone who did this most days. 3 hours, every day, until he fell over. I told the steward to find him a teacher and open the library to him. The teacher's report came back inside 2 months, and it was a professional, careful, entirely accurate assessment. Talent mediocre, ceiling low, unlikely to repay the investment. Then I walked past that courtyard a week later and found the teacher standing over the kid, doing what small men do when they've been told they're wasting their time on something. I hit him once. His head came apart against the wall. I told Meng Xiang to have it cleaned up and to remember one thing. No Luo, however worthless, gets humiliated by an outsider. The kid had watched the whole thing. Tian didn't run. Tian picked his wooden sword back up and stood there holding it, waiting to find out what happened next. Why a sword? I asked him. Tian thought about it seriously, the way 5-year-olds do when they've decided you're asking a real question. I think because I like it. I gave him the truth because I'd already decided lying to children in this family was a thing I didn't do. You won't get resources beyond the basics. Not from me. The library is yours. Go. Read. Take anything on any floor. Everything past that, you prove first. Tian bowed and went back to swinging. I want to be very clear about my own motives here, since I'm the one telling this. That was not kindness. That was the cheapest possible investment in a boy who was going to do it anyway. I got a lifetime of loyalty for the price of a library card. I just didn't know yet that it was the best trade I would ever make. The demon monks got dealt with by somebody else, which was ideal. A squad from the Shenjian sect came through, sword cultivators, in town to clean out exactly the sort of infestation growing in my outer city. One of their juniors shoulder-checked an old man in the street and started running his mouth, and their senior, organ refining, middle stage, made him apologize. I heard what he said to the junior afterward. That old man is not an old man. Standing near him feels like standing near something that would kill me on the way past without changing expression. Then they went to the temple and found out what they were actually dealing with. Gray robes were skin refining, white robes were bone refining, and out of the main hall came one in yellow, and yellow was organ refining. And he had not gotten there by training. Tian gotten there off an entire city's worth of frightened people believing very hard. Tian also had a set of prayer beads that raised a shield out of nothing. The Shenjian senior burned his own blood to reach the late stage and still lost ground, so a bolt of lightning came down out of a clear sky and took the roof off. Then another one, wider. Then a third, 30 meters across, and the temple courtyard stopped being a courtyard. Nobody saw where they came from. There was nobody standing anywhere near, because I had used an invisibility talisman and I was 2 streets over. The monk went down screaming at the sword cultivators for not even knowing how to finish a man properly, which, given that they hadn't done any of it, was one of the more satisfying things I've ever heard. I walked through the smoke afterward and picked his beads out of the ash, and the Shenjian sect finished off the rest of the monks and the worst of the converts, and left town believing they'd cleaned up the city. 3 problems solved with one hand. Never show your face, never take the credit, never take the blame. Then Sun Ren brought me 3 disasters in one morning: the heat, the dry riverbed, and the locusts coming down from the north. Come back in 3 days, I said. I made 6,000 talismans, 2,000 cooling, 2,000 rain summoning, and 2,000 for the locusts, which I had assumed would be a repelling talisman, because that is what a reasonable person would design. It did not repel them. Wen Tao stood in a field east of the city and released one, and every locust inside a wide circle simply stopped existing, all at once, in a soft gray fall, like ash going the wrong way. Tian stood in it for a while. I was thinking, he said carefully, that it would be nice to just chase them off. The Huai River dried up completely that year, not low, gone. You could walk the bed. 5 prefectures in the north were eaten to the dirt. And there were reports out of the worst of it that I'm not going to repeat. We had 3 harvests that year instead of 2. The cooling talismans went up over the fields and the compound and eventually over the whole of Qingxi City, and after that it did not matter what season it was outside our walls. Inside them it was spring, every day, forever. That single fact did more for our population than any battle I ever won. I also reformed the sect branch, which sounds boring and wasn't. The other branches had started buying up every raw material in the region and poaching our alchemists, 3 core people and 10 regulars in a fortnight. Feng Lin was ready to start bleeding staff until there was nobody left, so I cancelled our commission. All 20% of it. The main sect still took its 30 because the main sect could not be argued with, but our cut went to 0 and every alchemist under us went from keeping half of his own work to keeping 70% of it. Then I invented the recording stone. It captures a refinement from start to finish, every motion, every temperature change, every mistake, and we charge spirit stones to watch it. Sell a pill once, you get paid once. Sell a recording of how the pill was made, and you get paid by strangers for the rest of your life, and every one of them makes more pills, and every pill pays us commission. Luotian branch went from 12th of 13 to top 5 inside a year. Feng Lin handed me the branch. Just handed it over, sat down across from me, and asked for a cup of tea. I gave him one. Tian drank it in a single swallow like a man clearing dust from his throat. I have thought about that moment many times since. Then the Tang family came to buy us. The Huai River King and the Chen had gone for them with what they were calling a 1,000,000-man army and what was actually about 500,000 in armor, which is still a number that ruins your appetite. Wen Tao talked his father out of an alliance and his reasoning was pure ice. The head of the Tang family is not a fool. On the night before he loses, he will burn every grain of it. If we join late enough, he'll have to buy us instead. So we waited, and the Tang came to us, and they opened at 10% of their grain reserve. Sun Ren, who a year earlier could not throw matchmakers out of his own house without needing to sit down afterward, said, "Not enough, 50. Their grand elder went a color I have not seen on a living face. We settled at 30. Meng Quan waved him out of the gate. Come again any time, friend of the Tang family. And then we didn't march. Jia Fan pointed out that if the Tang were going to send the grain in installments, we could walk in installments. A shipment arrives, we cover some ground. Another shipment, more ground. We were 3/4 of the way there when the war ended without us. Meng Quan laughed for 2 days. And the grain, he kept saying, is already in our barns. Not everything worked. I spent a season trying to make spirit soil by burying spirit stones in a vegetable bed and produced the finest, most expensive plot of ordinary dirt in the prefecture. The energy went in and went straight back out, like watering sand. Feng Lin explained why, and the explanation was uglier than the failure. There is a whole spirit medicine sect under the main sect, and every spirit field they own feeds one place. That's the leash. That's how a main sect keeps 13 branches obedient forever. Not with soldiers, with soil. I did break through, though. Blood refining, middle stage, lifespan past 49 years, clan pool at 2,700. And the next rank wanted 20,000 points, which at 100 a day was 6 months of my family simply existing. Then one night I felt a spike of power out past our border and went to look, and found 3 men finishing off a 4th. The elders of the Feng and the Chen killing the elder of the Tang and doing it with 10 blood imprisonment talismans, a cage of red that clamps down and seals a cultivator's liang where it lives. One of those talismans costs more than a town. They used 10, and then they saw me and used 10 more. The cage came down and I felt my own energy stop moving inside my body, which is a sensation I do not recommend. So I lit it from the inside with black crow flame and tore the thing apart with my hands. 2 slaps, 2 more headless men on my border. In the Feng Elder's storage pouch I found spirit stones, pills, a manual titled Detailed Tutorial on Creating Blood Imprisonment Talismans, which I still consider the best loot of my life, and a collection of women's undergarments in assorted colors which I burned in the road without comment. Then I kept walking. I went through the Feng that night, and the Chen, and the Tang. Every man at organ refining in 3 families. The Chen had a hidden one, nearly at blood refining, sitting in a sealed room under his own house, and I walked up to him in the dark, and he never turned around. I got back before dawn and told Sunren I'd gone for a walk, and that he should send administrators to 3 territories in the morning. Tian looked at me for a long moment and then went to wake his clerks. Something happened to me on the way home though, and it took me a while to admit it. There was a moment on that road where I wanted to keep going. Not needed to, wanted to. My hands were fine and my head was clear, and there was a kind of low warm hum under my ribs that was, unmistakably, enjoying itself. I worked it out later, reading. From blood refining upward, the blood in your body starts developing something like an opinion. It drinks the atmosphere of a place, fill enough nights with slaughter, and it learns to look forward to them. So that's what blood refining means. Nobody tells you that part. I brewed myself tranquility pills after that. The same ones I made for Meng Baihe. I never told him. We took the whole prefecture in 20 days. Huaishui, unified, capital moved to Qingxi City, 4 great families, 5 towns, 3 territories, and a river valley, all under one name. And the man who had been given 7 days to live was now sitting in a courtyard drinking tea while clerks argued about tax districts outside his door. The only thing left in the province were the mountain bandits, and there were 3 of them worth the name. The Blood Wolf, the Grey Horse, who were cavalry, and the White Lotus, who were archers. The White Lotus hit us first, 10 villages and 2 towns. Their 9th chief walked into one of our towns, took a year's grain for 50,000 people, marched every able body out in a column, and gave an order about everyone left behind. I'm not going to describe what he meant. I'll tell you what I did about it. I stood in that empty town 3 days later, doors open, cooking fires still warm in some houses. Not one living person in any of them, and not one body either, because they'd taken everybody who could walk and left the rest to the road. Meng Quan asked what I wanted done. I told him what I wanted done. And then I went home and started building the thing I'd been putting off, because it had become obvious that I needed people who could go places an army can't. I gathered 123 of them, orphans out of the famine years, all of them grown now, all of them trained by us for 3 years in the things you don't put in a family record. I had 50 ephemeral flower pills, 2nd generation. I opened my mouth to explain the arithmetic. I need 50 of you, so I did not finish the sentence. The young woman standing nearest me, small, maybe 5 foot even, absolutely unremarkable, cut the throat of the man across from her before I got to the verb. It took a few breaths. It was very quiet. Nobody shouted. When I put enough pressure into the courtyard to stop it, there were 35 people standing. I gave the pill to all 35. 13 survived it. 3 at organ refining, middle stage. 7 at organ refining. 3 at bone refining. Every one of them with their entire future burned out of them in a single afternoon, in exchange for a strength they'd have needed 40 years to earn, except one, the small one, the one who'd started it. Her name was Zhou Meilin, and when I checked her afterward, the pill had only taken about 1/3 of her potential. I asked her about it. She told me flatly, the way you'd report the weather, that her family had died on the road during the famine, and that she had lain down beside them to wait her turn when our people found her. She has been 3 steps behind me ever since. I never did find out why the pill spared her. I have theories. None of them are comfortable. Xia Fan predicted the White Lotus would come again within a fortnight, and he predicted it by squinting at the sky over their camp and going quiet. Meng Quan nearly threw him off a wall. Soon, it's always soon with you. Inside the White Lotus, they were arguing about us. Their 2nd chief was 2.5 meters of red-haired enthusiasm and wanted to burn Qingxi City down. Their 3rd, a one-eyed man with a functioning brain, put it very simply. Leave the Luo alone and we live. Touch them and we die. Their chief split the difference, which is the worst thing a leader can do. Go and test them. Tian came with 500,000 men. 30,000 of those were elite archers in silver, and those archers hit maybe 1 shot in 3, and 1 shot in 3 went through armor. The first clash went 1-10 in our favor, and we still lost, because our 1 was a soldier. We'd spent 2 years and a fortune training, and their 10 were men who'd been handed a spear that morning. Meng Quan pulled back and came to me with a plan he was extremely proud of. Stack 30 to 50 rain-summoning talismans on maximum over 1 valley. Then stack 100 cooling talismans on minimum on top of it. I stared at him. You want to drop a river on them, I said, and then freeze it. Tian beamed at me. I gave him 3,000 talismans, 1,000 rain, 1,000 cold, 1,000 invisibility chi, and one piece of advice with them. If you come running to me for every single thing, what exactly is the army for? Tien took the talismans. Tien did not take the advice. Tien never has. Tien used all 1,000 rain talismans at once. The second chief of the White Lotus was standing in the valley with 500,000 men when the light changed. Tien squinted up at it and asked his aide what that was supposed to be, and then answered his own question with total confidence. Is there a flood in the sky? Are you an idiot? How would there be a flood in the sky? Then he screamed a word I won't repeat and got about half of the next sentence out. 500,000 bandits went down the valley like gravel in a gutter. The survivors climbed the drowning ones to get higher, which is the single most honest thing I have ever heard about human beings. Mengquan recalled the talismans early. Didn't even need the cold ones, he said cheerfully. The old ancestor would have taken my head off over the waist. The shadow guard found the second chief on a hillside spitting water. One knife, straight into the heart. We finished the rest before sundown. That's when Zhou Meilin took me down under the city. She'd found it while mapping the tunnels beneath Qingxi, which is the sort of thing I'd never have thought to order, and she'd started doing on her own initiative in the first month. Under my city, under my streets, under my markets, under the houses of people paying me taxes, was a chamber with an altar in it. There was a formation cut into the floor, not one I recognized. Random teleportation, unanchored, no destination written anywhere, which is a thing I would have told you was impossible. Behind the altar stood a statue in blood jade, and it was not a statue of a man, claws, a jaw that opened wrong, and 3 pupils in each eye, all of them crimson. Under its feet, carved into the base, were bodies with the hearts and livers taken out. The formation lit up while we were standing there. Something came out of it, a meter tall. A living copy of the statue, wet and furious and looking straight at me. I put a blood imprisonment talisman on it before it finished landing. Zhou Meilin, I said, holding a screaming impossibility down on the floor of my own city. You have brought me an enormous amount of trouble. Far away, and I didn't learn this for years, so let me just tell you now, in the eastern wilderness, some badly wounded immortals were asking a young man whether the divine child had been sent through. Yes, he said, but we set up so many formations that even I don't know where it went. How many is so many? Under 10 million. The thing had the raw strength of a body-refining cultivator. That's nothing. That's a strong farmhand. Its defense could not be broken by me at blood refining. I hit it with everything I had. I hit it with talismans. 10 days without food or water, and all it did was get thinner and hate me harder. So I stopped trying to kill it and started trying to hide it. 100 concealing talismans. Then, when that wasn't enough, I sat down and actually learned Formation Dao properly for the first time and built a seal. Sound, aura, everything, 100 meters straight down under my own courtyard. I called it the Origin Ghost because it didn't have a name and I needed something to write on the ledger. And then the grass started growing, crimson grass, around the cage. Nobody planted it. The soil under it went dark red and kept going darker. And the grass drank the thing's aura the way a wick drinks oil. That grass was carrying more raw liang than anything I'd ever handled. Naturally, I tested it. I steeped it in a teapot and called in a shadow guard at the peak of bone refining and had him drink it. Half a day later, he broke through to organ refining. Then he stood up bent sideways, with red in both eyes and nothing behind them, and Zhou Meilin took his head off before he'd finished turning around. The blood came at me, and Black Crow Flame ate it in the air. Well, I said, into a very quiet room. That was overconfident of me. I planted a spirit field the same season, and it was financially the stupidest thing I have ever done. 1,000 low-grade spirit stones buried in the ground, a spirit gathering array on top, a spirit locking array on top of that, 10 stones burned to run it for 10 hours, and at the end of 10 hours, I collected the energy of 5. A guaranteed, permanent 50% loss. I built it anyway because the main sex leash was spirit soil, and a leash you're paying to cut is still cut. That was also the year the beggar showed up. Filthy gray rags, a broken wooden fan, and a face that had never once been embarrassed about anything. I watched him try to cadge roast chicken off a street stall and get chased off. A monk wanting meat at his age, and then a man with a small daughter handed him a plain steamed bun without being asked. The monk thanked him and told him he'd have an official post by autumn. Tien got one. I checked. I want to describe how he arrived because it explains everything about him. Tien came into the outer city as a beggar, actually filthy, rags, bare feet, a wooden fan snapped down the middle. Tien tried to beg roast chicken off a stall, and the owner laughed him off the street. A monk wanting meat at his age. Then a man with a small daughter handed him a plain steamed bun, didn't say anything, just handed it over and went back to his cart. The monk ate it in 4 bites and told him he'd hold an official post by autumn. Then the beggar walked into my courtyard and demanded I hand over the Origin Ghost. I said, quite reasonably, "What's an Origin Ghost?" And I stood up. That's all I did. I stood up out of a stone chair, and this man, this filthy sandal-wearing beggar, went backward about 5 meters without visibly moving his feet and shouted in genuine fright, "Don't come near me!" I did not understand what was happening. I understood exactly one thing, which is that whatever he was terrified of me specifically, and he was not going to explain why. Tian never did explain, not properly. Only years later, and only in pieces. Something about having taken a piece of information from heaven that he wasn't entitled to, and about how if he moved against me, or even told anyone about me, the will of heaven and earth would grind him into dust for it. Tian also mentioned, in passing, entirely without emphasis, that he was somewhere in the top 3 on the continent. Tian said his name was Ziyu. Tian would come back roughly 100 times over the following years. Tian never once came for a social visit. Every single time, he wanted something. And the price kept going up, and so did the size of what he was offering. And I want you to remember that, because he eventually offered me something so large, I had to say no to it. I broke through to blood refining, late stage, lifespan past 49, clan pool at 2,850, all 4 professions open on the panel, and Sun Bo had been swinging a sword 3 hours a day for 3 straight months and had not reached even the beginning of skin refining, not 1 rank, not 1 step, 90 days of falling over in a courtyard, and the panel that ran my entire life would not have registered him as a rounding error. I watched him from a walkway one evening and had the least comfortable thought of my life in this world. Without the panel, I would be exactly like that kid. No. That's flattering myself. Without the panel, I'd have quit in the first week and told myself it was wisdom. I called him over and asked whether he was tired. Tired, he said. Very. Then why? I want to be strong. Tian said it in the flat, factual way of a child reporting something he was told. My father and mother said to protect my sister, so I need to be strong enough to protect the family. I assigned him a bottle of spirit-tempering pills a month. I have made maybe 4 soft decisions in this world. That was one of them, and I made it standing in a courtyard at dusk, and I did not tell anybody why. Li Guochang got pills too, and Li Guochang's story went differently. Tian was Li Wei's boy, enormous talent, and the work ethic of a cat in a sunbeam. Spirit-tempering pills feel, in his own words, like being sliced from the inside with small knives. And I handed him a bottle of 10 and told him there were 20 in it. There are 10, he said, counting. You miscounted, or are you saying I made a mistake? Tian was at skin refining, perfection stage, within a few months, so I raised his quota to 30. Tian decided, entirely on his own, with no evidence whatsoever, that this meant I was grooming him for something. Tian was not wrong. Tian was just extremely wrong about the timeline. The origin ghost got out. Its aura ate through the shackles. It broke a 10-layer cage. Thousands of formations and tens of thousands of talismans fired automatically and dropped a red cage over it, which held, barely, while I got down there. I hit it with 120% of everything I had. It went across the chamber and hit the far wall and got up without a mark on it. I stood there breathing hard, looking at a creature I could not scratch, and had a genuinely inspiring thought. If I skinned it, what grade of defensive artifact would the hide make? I couldn't skin it either, so I forged a new cage out of iron compressed 1,000 times over, and I put it back, and I made a note to revisit the question when I was stronger. I want you to notice that I did not consider letting it go. Not once. Not for a second. Meanwhile, the dynasty kept eating itself. The third prince demanded that the Liang clan hand over 2 counties and all their businesses in exchange for protection. The head of the Liang family looked at that offer, and then he did something nobody expected. Tian took his entire clan out of the dynasty, walked, and on his way out, he gave the 2 counties away, to us and to the Guan family, for nothing. Better to hand them to my enemies, he said, than to kneel. Let's see how His Highness does now that the only road he had left belongs to someone else. Xiafan was with me when the news came in. Tian went very still and said the Liang family's fortune had simply stopped existing, the way a light does. Not dimmed, stopped. The sect had its own war, and it was funnier. 13 branches split into 2 camps, Chongqing, the old holy land of alchemists in this dynasty, and us. 2 branches took bribes from Chongqing and then publicly supported us anyway. Their reasoning, delivered to my face without a flicker. We take the money, and we provide timely assistance. The offended party can't do anything about it either way. I have rarely been more impressed. Luo Shan took first place in the dynasty, and Gong Sun Wen, who ran Changqing, refused to call his family for help. I found out why later. Tian left the Nangong clan in the first place to prove he was something other than his father's son. Calling them in would have turned his entire life into a joke he'd told himself, so he lost instead. I respect that, and I'd have made the other choice, and I think about him more often than I expected to. The whole sect war was decided by 2 branches taking a bribe. Wanshan and Changping both accepted money from Changqing to back Changqing publicly. Then they backed us instead. I asked one of their people how they justified it. Tian didn't even hesitate. We take the money and we provide timely assistance. The offended party can't do anything about it either way. I have thought about that answer for years. It is the purest sentence in this dynasty. Nobody was lying. Nobody broke a rule. They simply understood before anyone else that a promise is only worth what the promiser can enforce, and Changqing could enforce nothing. Luo Shan took first place in the dynasty out of it. I gave 9,000 talismans to the branch to sell, mostly to see what happened. Feng Lin came back with 45,000 low-grade spirit stones, 5 stones apiece. I had been quietly assuming 2, maybe 3. I kept my face completely still and said, "We're all alchemists here. It wouldn't be right to squeeze the children." Both of those old men looked at me like I'd said something noble. I gave them 30,000 more. Changping came apart the way places do when you have money and patience. 3 families there allied against us. We bought one of them. The head of the Bai family put it beautifully when he signed. "It isn't that I want to put a knife in your back, it's that otherwise my clan goes into the ground alongside yours." Bai hit them from inside, we pressed from outside, and out of 6 counties we took 5. The 6th got snatched out from under us at the last moment by the Miao family of Chengguan, who had been following our campaign around like a plaster stuck to our heel. Meng Quan wanted to go kill them all immediately. Xiafan stopped him, and he stopped him by pointing at nothing. The Guan family's fortune just spiked. Leave home now and they'll hit the house. Remember the Miao. They come back. Changping took a year, and it took it one family at a time. 3 houses out there had allied against us, so we bought the smallest one. The head of the Bai family signed at a table in his own hall and gave me his reason without being asked. "It isn't that I want to put a knife in your back. It's that otherwise my clan goes into the ground beside yours." Tian said it looking straight at me. I gave him a county for that. Bai hit them from inside. We pressed from the border. 5 of 6 counties came to us in about 11 weeks. The 6th got taken out from under us on the last day. The Miao family of Chengguan had been following our campaign for a year, half a step behind, taking nothing, fighting nobody. And when the last defended city opened, their column was closer to it than ours was. Meng Quan wanted to turn the army around that afternoon. Xiafan stopped him by looking at the sky over our own territory and going very quiet. "The Guan family's fortune just spiked," he said. "Leave home now and they hit the house." I was also running pill trials, and I'm going to tell you about them honestly, because I've noticed I've been sliding around it. I had the crimson grass. I knew what it could do. It had taken a man from bone refining to organ refining in an afternoon before it took his mind. So I refined it into something controlled, and I tested the versions on prisoners at organ refining, captured elders, enemy commanders. Men who would otherwise have been executed, which is the sentence I used at the time and which I notice I still reach for. The first 3 formulations killed everyone who took them. One of them, the elder of the Huang family, asked me a question on his way out. Tian wanted to know why I bothered with any of it, why I let my nephews campaign at all. I could walk into any clan in Changping and crush it in an afternoon. I told him the truth, because he was owed something. What matters more on this continent, strength or authority? Suppose the whole world belongs to the Feng family. Put one immortal in front of them and they kneel anyway. One gesture and the owner of this land changes. Tian thought about that for a moment. Then he died. I got the formula right on the 4th try. Liang and blood pill. 1 pill, 1 small rank, in anyone, immediately. No cultivation required, no talent required, no decade of sitting in a cave. Then a prisoner named Yan Long took a second one, 3 days after his first. His body was untouched. Not a mark on him, but whatever the pill left behind inside had piled up. And the second dose set it off, and there was nothing left running behind his eyes. 1 a year. That's the ceiling. 1 pill, per person, per year, and the year is not negotiable. I wrote that down and underlined it, and it is the single most important line in my own notes. The catalog came in that season, and I read it the way other people read poetry. Bone Demon Fire, Earth Grade Supreme, 50,000 top grade spirit stones burns the soul directly. Volcanic Flame, 10,000. Rhinoceros Heart Flame, 100. Azure Flame, 50. And at the bottom, one line I nearly turned past. Spirit Flame, unidentified. Stock, 1. Price, 1 top grade spirit stone. Completely black. Burns most things into nothing. Appears to possess no consciousness of its own. 1 stone. For a spirit flame. Because nobody could work out what it was, and nobody wanted to find out with their own hands. I bought it. Obviously I bought it. But that comes later, and I want to do this in order, because Meng Baihei came home first. A year after he left for the Great Hanging Temple, he walked back through our gate in yellow robes, with yellow prayer beads on his wrist, and a small golden bell at his belt. The Great Hanging Temple had cut him in the first round of selection. Talent insufficient. Tian packed his things and started walking home, and on the road, a monk picked him up. a monk who ate meat and drank wine and refused to explain himself, out of a place called the Nameless Temple in the southern wilderness. Baihei had 6 months to settle his affairs, then he'd be leaving, and the return journey between divine provinces is longer than a human life. Tian was at organ refining, late stage. The bell at his belt held his prayer beads, and when I asked how the killing intent was, he tipped the bell over and poured out a heap of them onto my stone table. A pile. A small hill of beads, each one used up and gone dull, like coals out of a stove. I looked at that heap for a while. Then I built him something better. Half of it was pure stone, which settles a mind. Half was blood essence stone, which eats killing intent and digests it. Together, in the shape of a short sword, half blood red and half white, small enough to hang at the chest, dozens of times more effective than the beads, and reusable forever because it processed what it swallowed and let it go. I did not tell him it took me 11 attempts. Ziyu came back and identified the crimson grass in about 4 seconds. That, he said, and for once he was not smiling, is the blood-colored spider lily, one of the 10 divine rank spirit medicines on this continent. It grows in one place, and the place is not on any map. I have seen it 3 times in my life. Then he asked where I'd gotten it. I drank my tea. Tian got very loud. Luo Yuanhai, are you even human? If it weren't for the will of heaven, I would flatten you where you sit. Tian wanted one. In exchange, he offered a cultivation technique for Sun Jingyi. Because that was the other thing. The child was not getting better anymore. The pill I'd made years ago had bought her time, and the time was running out. And by then she was unconscious more days than not, and the room she slept in had frost on the inside of the windows in summer. The technique was called the Bing Shin technique, Earth grade low. It works by turning the practitioner's heart into ice, actual ice, mysterious ice, the kind that takes a decade off your life expectancy to grow inside your chest. It would only work for her. That was the point. That thing in her heart that was killing her was the only reason she could survive the cure. I traded him a divine rank spirit medicine for it without arguing about the price, and he noticed that I didn't argue, and he never brought it up again, which is the closest that man ever came to tact. I fed it into her while she was unconscious. I sat in that freezing room and pushed a technique into a child who couldn't consent to it, and then I waited to find out what I had done. Around then, the Guan family gave us an entire county, for free, for a worthless scrap of paper promising we wouldn't attack them. Sunren brought me the treaty with the expression of a man who has found money in the street and is checking the corners for wires. Lu Jun, his right hand, said the same thing in fewer words. Nobody gives away a county. So I went and looked. Under the Guan family's oldest holding was a legacy secret realm. Wei inheritance ground. Somebody who had actually reached the immortal realm had died there and left their things behind. And the Guan had been sitting on the entrance for generations, paying an entire county's worth of taxes in bribes and treaties to keep everyone's eyes elsewhere. Ziyu came with me, mostly to be annoying. I found the entrance in about a minute. Tian was genuinely offended. Generations of that family had known where it was and still needed a ritual to open it. It's a pocket of space folded into nothing, I said. There's exactly one point where it touches the world. With basic formation theory, you can always find the seam. Tian fanned himself and said nothing for the rest of the walk, which was the most peaceful he'd ever been. Inside were traps, real ones, layered, the kind that kill you for stepping correctly. I walked through them under 100 formations off my array discs and took what was in the vault. 3 techniques, a movement art, a blood-burning art, and an incomplete body-refining art, whose first level out of 9 was already rated yellow, high grade. 5 bottles of pills. A Yao beast egg the size of my 2 hands, gray-black and covered in patterns, and 1 seed in a jade box with no label of any kind. The Guan family's grand elder was waiting outside when I came up, because of course he was. Blood refining, middle stage. Looking at an old man he had been told was at the very bottom of the ladder above him. Return what you took. I took a step forward and let my aura come up to meet his exactly. Blood refining, middle stage. Tian drew a purple sword artifact. I put it out with a ring I'd found downstairs about 6 minutes earlier. I took a second step and let it rise again. Late stage, and he played his real card, and I have to give him credit because it was a good one. 100 fire talismans all at once from a storage ring he'd clearly been saving for the worst day of his life. In cultivation, he shouted at me over the light. Strength is not everything. Completely correct, I said, and then I let mine go. I don't know the final count. It was somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 all at once, and the sky over that hillside stopped being sky. The last thing he said was that it wasn't possible. I want to walk that fight back a little because it was the best one I had before the end. Tian came out of the ground in front of me at blood refining, middle stage, and he was completely confident because his information said the Luo family's ancestor had broken through 6 months earlier. So I took 1 step and let my aura come up to meet his exactly, middle stage. Tian drew a purple sword artifact and I put it out with a ring I had found downstairs about 6 minutes earlier, and I let him watch me do it. Second step, late stage. His face changed there, not fear, recalculation. And then he played the card he had clearly been saving for the worst day of his life, and it was genuinely a good one. 100 fire talismans out of a storage ring, all at once, over a hillside. In cultivation, he shouted at me over the light. Strength is not everything. Completely correct, I said. Then I put my palm through his head. And the Guan family had about 4 days left, and they went faster than that. Cities opened their own gates. Their family head poisoned himself in his chair before anyone got to him, and Meng Quan put a sword through the body anyway and turned it on general principle. 13 counties. The old man with 7 days to live now held 13 counties, a sect branch, a divine medicine growing in his basement, a monster he couldn't kill living under his house, and a child upstairs whose heart was slowly turning into ice while she slept. I gave the liang and blood pill to my entire family that winter. Diluted in water, the same way I'd done with the blood pills years before. Every man, woman, and child carrying the Luo surname drank a cup of it. Meng Quan went to organ refining, late stage. Sun Ren and Li Wei both broke into bone refining in the same week and did not speak to each other for 2 days out of pure competitive irritation. Li Guocheng screamed loud enough that the whole compound heard it. His father went white in the face, not from worry, from embarrassment. And I heard him mutter that his eldest was a disgrace, his second was a disgrace, and perhaps it was time to consider a third. The boy came out the other side, at bone refining, middle stage. I raised his pill quota from 30 a month to 50, and Sunbo went from skin refining, early stage, to skin refining, middle stage. That was the whole result. That's all a divine medicine did for him. Xiao looked at the numbers afterward and told me the boy's body was like a cracked kettle. Less than a third of anything you poured in stayed in. I went and found him in his courtyard, swinging an iron sword now instead of a wooden one, and I told him the truth because that is the only currency he and I have ever used. There's nothing wrong with being ordinary, I said. Most of this family is ordinary. They live well. Nobody's ashamed of them. Tian kept swinging. There is a place, I said, where you would get stronger. It will hurt worse than dying. Would you go? I'd go. And if you die there, or come back crippled? That was the only time he hesitated. I watched a 9-year-old boy stand in a courtyard and actually price out his own death, and his jaw locked and he said it through his teeth. I'd go, even if I die. They took him to the Shadow Guard yard that night. Xiao came back a month later with his assessment, and it is the only report I have ever kept, the worst talent I have seen, and the most unbreakable heart I have ever met. Then the Miao family came due, 2 clans out of Changli, the Chong and the Yu, who had hated each other for 1,000 years and had suddenly discovered common ground, came to us for help because the Miao of Chengguan and the K of Xunyang were carving their prefecture up between them. I did not care about the Chang. I did not care about the Yu. I cared that the Miao had taken a county out from under us during the Changping campaign, and before that, years ago, when the Luo family was 400 people and a reputation, the Miao had walked into our granary during a famine year and taken our winter grain, and the head of this family had stood in his own courtyard and watched them cart it away because there was nothing else he could do. Sun Ren had been a young man then. Tian had never mentioned it once. We took back the Changping county in 3 days, unified the prefecture, and marched on Qingguan with 1,000,000 men in armor. The Miao still wouldn't let go of Chongli. That's the part that killed them. They had 2 hands full, and they would not put anything down. And then we hit a wall, and the wall was geography. Chengguan's border fortress sat in terrain where 1,000,000 men are worth exactly as much as 20,000, because 20,000 is all you can physically feed into the line at once. We sat outside it for a month. Meng Quan ground his teeth down to the roots. Sha Fan, asked for a prediction, gave the most honest answer of his career. I don't know. It was Meng Baihe who said it quietly in the command tent, like he was embarrassed to be pointing out something obvious. What about the talismans? They raised 1,000 cooling talismans over that fortress and turned them all the way down. The temperature inside the walls collapsed in under an hour. By evening, the Miao soldiers were burning Liang blood, the strength in their own bodies, the stuff you fight with, purely to keep from freezing on the walls. One of them fell off. Tian didn't slip. Tian simply stopped. Their general was a hard man in dark red armor, and he understood before anyone else what he was standing in. Not a fortress, a tomb with a schedule. I should describe what that siege actually looked like from the wall, because it is the cleanest thing my family ever did. There was no assault. Nobody climbed anything. 1,000 pieces of paper went up over that fortress at dawn and hung there, and the temperature started going down, and it did not stop going down. By midday, the stone was cold enough to take skin off a bare hand. By evening, the defenders were burning Liang blood, the strength inside their own bodies, the thing you fight with, purely to keep their hearts running. Every hour on that wall cost them a week of cultivation. One of them fell off it around midnight. Tian didn't slip. Tian simply stopped and went over, and nobody near him reacted because reacting costs heat. 1,000,000 men outside and not one arrow fired. Tian turned to his own second-in-command, a man who had served under him for years, and asked how the Miao family had treated them. Very well, sir. So we should be loyal to the end? Of course, sir. Tian took his head off in the same motion. Brother, he said to the body, don't blame me for being heartless. I gave you chances. Who knew you wouldn't take one? Then he stood on the wall in the cold and made the actual argument out loud. To nobody, the way people do when they've already decided. The Miao treated me well, fine, but with my cultivation, wherever I go, I'll be treated as an honored guest. You think a little preferential treatment buys my corpse? I held this wall for a month. I've done enough. Then he screamed at the gate crew to open it. There was a fight inside the city between the men who wanted to live and the men who were loyal, and the men who wanted to live won, and the gates came open from the inside like a mouth. Meng Baihei put away his prayer beads. Father, the gates are open. Xia Fan shook his fan and said, to nobody in particular, so the talismans convinced them after all. Well, isn't that reasonable? Meng Quan didn't say anything. Tian just started walking. More than 20 cities fell in a matter of days. That's what nobody tells you about fortress lines. They're not walls. They're a cork. Pull the first one and the whole prefecture is just open country with towns in it. Sun Ren read the report at breakfast and put it down and permitted himself one sentence, alone, in his own room. Meow, meow. When you were stealing grain out of my family's yard, did you know this day was coming? Then he wrote the character for approved on a stack of documents and went to have his tea. The Miao family head worked out the arithmetic about a week later. Tian traded 1 county in Changping for a shot at 4 counties in Changli. Perfectly reasonable. Excellent value. Except now, the gate of his own prefecture was hanging open, 20-odd cities were gone, and his ally the Cave family was writing him letters about holding on just a little longer. His grand elder told him it would take at least 3 more months to crack Changli. 3 months, he said. Ha! 3 months. And then, for the first time in his life, that man felt regret. Tian said it out loud, alone, in a room, which is the only place anyone ever says it. If we hadn't taken the Luo family's grain, none of this. Tian recalled 500,000 elite soldiers from Changli to come home and defend, and it was already far too late, and while they were marching, one of his own vassal families quietly wrote to us offering to open the back door. The Kai family, bigger than the Miao in 2 of the counties, and they'd been lying low for a generation. One of our officials, a man named Mo Jianjun, brought us the offer, and somebody at the table immediately suggested it was a trap. Mo Jianjun didn't even raise his voice. The Kai family's young lord and about 30 of his relatives are currently living in Qingxi City. Shall I have them brought in? The Miao family found out about the betrayal and had nothing to do about it. They couldn't punish the Kai without giving us land to buy the time, and they couldn't ignore them either. Their head sat in a dark room and asked himself what to do, and there was no answer that worked, and there never is once you're in that room. The Miao family of Chengguan was erased inside 2 weeks. I did not go. I was busy with an old man in a basement. Their ancestor, Guo Lihua, had come out of seclusion when the walls started falling. A man who'd broken into transcending mortality 20 years earlier and killed a veteran of the same realm within a month of doing it, which is how the Miao had gotten their grip on that prefecture in the first place. I wanted to let your family live a bit longer, I said out loud in my own courtyard, to nobody. But since it's come to this, it took 3 days. I brought shadow guards because I wasn't going for one man. The Liang and blood pill was only first generation. There was a second generation possible, no side effects, no yearly ceiling, and developing it required an extremely large number of cultivators to test on. I have never dressed this up, and I'm not going to start now. I am not a good man. I am also not a monster in the way people mean the word. If you leave me alone, I will never think about you. If you take something of mine, or stand where I'm walking, I will remove you, and I will not think about that afterward either. That's the whole thing. That's the entire moral content of my life here. And it fits in 3 sentences, and I have never found a fourth. I came home with Guo Lihua and 8 cultivators at organ refining, and I put them somewhere quiet, and then I went down under the courtyard because I had an errand with the origin ghost. It was lying on the floor of the black iron cage, months without water by then, not enough strength to stand up, but those 3 crimson pupils in each eye were spinning like it had been saving them for me. You know, I said, I really don't like the way you look at me. I crouched and cut 20 of the blood-colored spider lilies that had come to maturity. There were several hundred of them by then. The floor of that chamber wasn't stone anymore. The thing's aura had soaked into the ground until the whole space had gone dark red. And the divine medicine that grows in exactly one place on this continent was coming up through it like weeds in a gutter. That's when Void got out of me on its own. I should explain Void, since it becomes important. It was the flame from the catalog, the one nobody could identify, sold for one top-grade spirit stone because nobody wanted it. Every other spirit flame in the world tries to escape the moment you unseal it. This one came toward me, deliberately, like a dog crossing a road. It was completely black, and it ate other flames. I fed it black crow flames, and it got stronger, and it never stopped getting stronger, and it had no consciousness in it that anybody could measure except that it clearly, obviously, wanted things. I named it Void, and it crackled at me happily, and that was that. So down in the red chamber, it detached from my chest and hung in the air, staring at the caged thing, flickering in a rhythm I'd learned to read. "You want," I said slowly, "its eyes?" It flared. "Go ahead." The flame went over its face and stuck there. The origin ghost came off the floor for the first time in months, thrashing, screaming, hammering at its own head with both arms, and none of it made any difference at all. I watched 3 crimson pupils crack like glass beads under a press. Then they came apart, and what came out of the sockets was an aura I had never felt from anything, in any place, at any time. It came across that chamber straight at me, and several hundred blood-colored spider lilies drank it out of the air before it got halfway. "Is that all you have?" I said. Void ate the fragments and came back a different color. Not darker, cleaner, purer. Whatever grading system spirit flames belonged to, it had gone up a full tier and was still climbing while I stood there. I asked whether the rest of the creature would work the same way. It thought about it for a few breaths and told me no. The eyes were unique. Everything else was just meat. So I threw the origin ghost a Yao beast carcass I'd had prepared. Because I'm not sentimental, but I am practical, and a creature that grows me a divine medicine is worth feeding. "Live well," I told it, "and don't die by accident." It would cost me enormously. It had no eyes left to look at me with. It turned its face toward me anyway. Ziyu came back that week wanting another spider lily, and the price had gone up again. "Way improved spirit gathering array blueprint," he said. "How about it?" I let him keep going. "Fine. We improved spirit gathering array and an improved spirit locking array. 2 formations for 1 flower. You've robbed me." I drank my tea. Tien got very quiet. Then he pulled out a piece of animal hide so old it had gone the color of weak tea, and it was breathing out something I could feel from 2 meters away. "Blood prison killing array," he said. "The oldest killing formation there is. Complete it, and it doesn't just threaten ordinary cultivators of the immortal realm. It threatens beings at my level." Then, immediately, because he is who he is. Of course, the reserves of spirit stones it needs are so large that most people who own the blueprint have never once set it up. I traded him 1 flower for 3 formations. Tien left in a hurry after that, coughing twice, and I noticed the coughing and filed it away with everything else about that man that never quite added up. The 2 improved arrays were beautiful, several times the effect, more than 10 times in places, at a fraction of the spirit stone cost. With those, I could stop running a spirit field at a 50% loss and start running one at a profit. I could put spirit gathering over the whole family compound, not for cultivation, just so that ordinary Luo who would never lift a sword in their lives would live a few years longer for breathing better air. That alone was worth the trade. And I want to be clear that I did the arithmetic on the extra years before I did anything else, because more years is more Liang. The blood prison killing array. I could not read at all. Every character on it was legible. Every diagram made sense on its own. And the moment I tried to connect 2 of them, my mind slid off like a hand off wet stone. I put it away and said I'd study it slowly, which is what I say about things that frighten me. That was also the season Sun Jingyi woke up. I was at the edge of the spirit field, failing to install the improved formations for the 4th time in a night, when a door opened behind me in a courtyard where no doors should have been opening. She was standing in it. White as paper, frost on her sleeves, cold rolling off her in slow waves. "That little one is awake?" I sat her down under the pavilion and gave her tea and asked how she felt. "Old ancestor, I'm fine." A pause. "I just feel a little cold." Which is not how the Bingshin technique works. When the technique takes, the cold gathers in the heart meridian and the practitioner stops feeling temperature entirely. Absolute 0 wouldn't register. She was sitting in front of me with frost forming on her own collar, telling me she felt a little cold. She didn't mention that her Liang blood was nearly empty. She didn't mention that her heart had started beating in a rhythm that wasn't the one she was born with. I found both of those out later, from the physician. Because she had decided she had troubled me enough for 1 lifetime. She was 11. I gave her the manual, an actual copy, in her own hands, hers to keep, and told her to practice it properly, and to come to me with anything she didn't understand, and to come to me if she needed anything at all, at any hour. Her eyes went bright. She squashed it down immediately, the way she'd learned to. Then she said, "Old ancestor, It's been a long time since we played chess. I already had the bowls out of my storage ring before she finished the sentence. I broke through the next month. I sat down in the open ground of my own courtyard, fed in one day's naturally regenerated Liang blood, and the bottleneck that had been in front of me for 2 years simply wasn't there anymore. Blood refining, perfection stage. My strength multiplied several times over in a single instant. I stood up and cracked my neck and thought about the last realm of the mortal five. Transcending mortality. Blood refining refines the blood. Bone refines the bone. Organ refines the organs. And transcending mortality refines what exactly? Nobody had ever given me an answer that wasn't a poem. I did not know yet that it was the only rank in the entire ladder that money cannot buy. 6 months later, Meng Baihe left. The date had been set since the day he came home. Time was up and he came to say goodbye. I gave him something before he went, a spirit artifact the size of my palm, half blood red and half pure white, in the shape of a short sword. Yellow grade, middle quality, nothing special by the standards of the world he was walking into. Not a high grade, I said, but compared to prayer beads that don't even reach yellow, this absorbs several times more killing intent, 10 times, on a bad day. And here's the point. As long as you don't flood it all at once, it digests what it takes and pushes it back out on its own. It doesn't fill up. It doesn't need replacing. Tian poured Liang blood into it and felt what it was, and he didn't say anything for a moment. We sat there a while longer. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that either of us would have survived saying. Then the sun went down and he stood up and went around the whole family one by one and said goodbye to every single person and left through the front gate on foot. It was spring plowing outside Qingshu City, green rice paddies to the horizon, farmers working with their sleeves rolled, children running along the ditch banks and shrieking about nothing. His master was waiting on the road eating a chicken leg. About time, the old monk said. We should go. Baihe stood there with a divine city at his back. Master, if we leave, do we really never come back? The monk chewed and thought about it. Come back? Probably. In a few hundred years. Maybe 1,000. Tian gestured with the bone. But by then, everything's changed. Forget the Qingxi Luo family that raised you. Whether the Great Wen dynasty still exists at all is a question. Then he noticed the little sword at the boy's chest and stopped chewing. Where did that come from? My old ancestor made it. Tian said it refines the spirit and absorbs killing intent. The monk was quiet for a long time. Then, in a very different voice, if it's really as you say, then that old ancestor of yours is something. Baihe's whole face changed. Then when we come back, I know what you want to say. It's still no. Tian put his hands behind his back. Skill in forging doesn't mean anything on the path of cultivation. Transcending mortality is the ceiling for mortals. And on this continent, if you haven't entered the immortal realm, you're an ant. Even the first step of it, even that, is beyond anything a mortal reaches. Forget power, just count years. A mortal sits in seclusion for 6 months, 3 years, 10 at the outside. We immortal sits down for a century and gets up annoyed that it went so fast. Tian started walking. So tell me, foolish disciple, move the calendar forward 1,000 years. Will the Qingxi Luo family still exist? And if it does, will it be the Qingxi Luo family you knew? And he wandered off down the road, hands behind his back, having delivered one of the great speeches of that boy's life while holding a greasy chicken bone, which I think about more than the speech. Baihe looked back at the city once. Then he went after his master, and everything he'd been longing to say turned into one breath out, and he walked away from a family that had turned itself inside out to keep him alive. I was under the pavilion when Zhou Meilin came to tell me they'd gone. She nodded. She poured the tea. She didn't say anything, because she never does. The southern wilderness, I said. The nameless temple. 12 divine provinces on this continent. The Great Wen dynasty is a speck in one of them. A mortal cultivator at the absolute peak, walking every day of his life, wouldn't see a 10 millionth of it. And then I stopped thinking about it because he had his own road. And I had a bottleneck, and there was nothing about missing him that I could spend. The pills stopped working on me around then, which was its own kind of milestone. A Liang and blood pill used to be an event. By that year, one dissolved in about 10 minutes and moved my cultivation the way a cup of water moves a lake. Feels like I could take another, I said out loud to an empty courtyard, and then didn't, because I had watched a man's mind come apart from exactly that thought, and because I had finally worked out the actual mechanism. Void, sitting inside me doing nothing in particular, ate the residue those pills left behind at about 5% a day. 5% a day meant 20 days to clear one pill completely. 20 days, not a year. My personal ceiling on a divine medicine was 20 days because I happened to own a flame that ate the poison, and nobody else on this continent had one. I bought a yellow-grade high-quality cauldron from the main sect and burned 300 failed refinements in a row trying to build the second generation and got 5 new formulations out of it, and every one of them killed the people I tested it on. Then the emperor made his move. The new one, Han Qingyu. The legitimate one. The one everybody had quietly written off while the princes carved up the provinces. Tian had 2 prefectures and the single strongest force in the dynasty, and he had been sitting very still for years. Tian went for Qingcheng Prefecture, which produced almost half of the dynasty's grain and salt. His minister, a careful man named Kai Bo, laid it out for him. Qingcheng was in a net, Zijin, Changqing, Lushan, and 1 neutral prefecture around it on all sides. It had no way out and nothing to do but defend. Like a net, the emperor repeated, defend as much as possible, and laughed because his 3rd brother sat in Qingcheng, and there was history there. Years back, Qingcheng had had a chance to expand. A clan in a neighboring prefecture had come to them for help, and the 3rd prince had gotten greedy and assumed they were already in his pocket, and the clan had picked up 1,000 years of holdings and walked out of the dynasty, rather than kneel. That was the day Qingcheng became a room with no doors. It just took a decade for anyone to notice. Sun Ren's read on the whole business took 4 seconds. So the emperor takes Qingcheng, and with half the dynasty's grain he sweeps everything else. That can't happen. Tian put 300,000 men on the Qingcheng border and waited. The Ke family of Xunyang had gotten greedy in the meantime. They'd taken Changli with the emperor's quiet help because the emperor wanted somebody clamped onto our ankle, and were now sitting on 2 prefectures and feeling excellent about themselves. So they started running patrols along our border, big ones, hundreds of thousands of men wandering back and forth just outside Chengguan, testing where our line was. Sun Ren asked the room what to do about it, and everyone found something fascinating on their desks. Mo Jianjun stood up. Does the patriarch know the Shu family of Wanshan? I know they hold the Ink Jade Kirin, one of the 3 divine mounts of the dynasty. The Shu family's 3rd son died recently on Ke family land, the head of the Shu family's favorite son. Tian let it sit. It's being called an accident. It was arranged by the Ke. There's no proof. The matter has been closed. Then he laid out the whole thing in 1 sentence. If we give the Shu family a push right now, the head of the Shu family will go to war with the Ke for us, gladly, and thank us for it. And here is what makes that plan beautiful, and it took me a while to properly appreciate it. It was completely open. We didn't hide it. We made no attempt to hide it. The head of the Shu family knew exactly who was feeding him pretexts and exactly why. Tian stood in his own doorway that night, having just been told by 3 of his own elders that attacking the Ke family served no purpose and would benefit nobody except the Luo, and he sighed and said, so I have to play the fool and walk down the road the Luo family paved for me, because without a pretext, he couldn't override his elders, and they'd handed him a pretext, and a pretext he knows is fake is still a pretext, and dead sons don't care about provenance. Tian gave the order that afternoon. Ke family men have been running wild in our valleys, killing my servants, showing my family open contempt. Therefore, as of today, war. His man asked what to do if the elders objected. For the good of the family, the head of the Shu house said, laughing without any humor in it at all, what right do they have to object? 10,000 Ink Jade Kirin came over the border into Ke territory, 10,000, cavalry in the top 2 or 3 of the entire dynasty, and I'd once stolen 50 of them and been very pleased with myself. The Ke family did the only sane thing and refused to fight. They pulled their troops off our border to cover Wanshan instead, sat down inside their own city walls, and let the horses ride circles around them, which meant we were free. I heard about the Qi family's internal reckoning later, and it's the funniest thing in this whole war. The head of the Qi family had his 2nd son on the floor in front of him screaming that he didn't know anything, and his eldest son walked in and leaned on the doorframe. Second brother, this started with you. How could you not know? The younger one begged him not to say it. The elder brother reached down, pressed him back onto the floor with one hand, and told his father everything, how the boy had killed the Shu family's 3rd son over an argument in a winehouse, how he'd covered it up badly, how the Luo family had then handed the Shu family a reason to move. Even knowing all of this is our doing, he finished. The head of the Shu family will still walk the road the Luo family laid for him. The younger one crawled toward his father in tears, screaming that it was all lies. The father confined him to the house for a year, which is what fathers do when the alternative is admitting they made him. The emperor got the same report and understood immediately. Way open conspiracy, he said to an empty hall. And the trouble with an open conspiracy is that there's no answer to it. I'll say this for Han Qingyu. Tian was not slow. While all of this was going on, I finally went to look at the Shadow Guard yard myself. It sits on bare ground outside Qingxi City and covers more space than most towns. Calling it a courtyard is a joke somebody made once that stuck. It is a separate world with its own weather. And the weather is the smell of blood, and at dawn there's a red mist over it that nobody has ever been able to explain to me. Xiao went in on my behalf because I wanted the honest version, and people lie to my face. There's one rule in that place. The bigger your fist, the better your accommodation. Sunbo was in the worst room, which was not a room but a barracks bay shared with whoever was still alive that week. Tian was number 38. Nobody in that yard has a name. Names are a thing you get issued when you graduate, if you graduate. The recruit in the next bunk, number 39, tried to talk to him. 38, where are you from? Nothing. 39 laughed and let it go, and then explained the situation out loud anyway because people who expect to die talk to whoever's nearest. Your life belongs to the Luo family. Really, it belongs to the old ancestor. Everyone who ends up here already died once somewhere else. There's exactly one way out of this place, and it's up. Tian had only started talking to 38 for one reason, and he said that part too. The people in this bay have changed over 5 times in a month. You're the only one who's still here. Xiao watched from outside for a while and then came home and gave me his report. Excellent heart nature, slightly lacking in talent, which is, and I knew this even as he said it, the most generous phrasing that man has ever produced. Anyone else with that body would have lasted 3 days. I sat with my tea afterward for longer than I usually do. God is not fair. That's the whole of it. A genius needs 1 day for a thing. A mediocre man needs 100 or 1,000. And there is no amount of wanting that closes the gap. Families with real bloodlines figured this out generations ago. The talented ones get the resources, and the rest get sent out at a certain age to run the family businesses and produce more children, and everybody agrees not to say what that arrangement actually is. Sunbo against Li Guochang or against Meng Baihe was not a comparison. It wasn't in the same category of thing, and his will was the strongest I have ever encountered in either life. Sunbo, I said to a cup of tea. Sunbo, I get more curious every year. How far does someone like you actually get in a world like this one? I had done everything for that boy I could think of doing, everything short of the one thing I couldn't buy. Then the sky over White Lotus Prefecture opened. I was playing chess with Ziyu under the pavilion when a pressure came across the horizon, and both of us looked up at the same moment. There was a white lotus standing in the void over the world, not a cloud shaped like one, a lotus, rooted between heaven and earth, big enough that the distance made no difference at all. Then it faded out, and the sky was just sky. You know what that is? I said. It wasn't a question. Tian stopped fanning himself. Of course I know. There's nothing on this continent I don't know if I want to. Tian tapped the board. Beat me first. I beat him in half an hour and I let it look close, which took more effort than winning. Then he told me. There is a place called Baifan Temple, and it had just finished unifying every Buddhist power inside White Lotus Prefecture, including the Great Hanging Temple, which had been the largest religious power in that prefecture for 800 years and which had, until that week, never lost anything. Don't be fooled by the shine on Buddhism, Ziyu said. Inside it's filthy, and the filthiest parts are the 3 demon monk powers. Baifan Temple is the last of the 3. The last. The weakest of the 3, which still means nothing you have ever met. And the lotus was theirs, their sacred object, the Baifan lotus. Right now it can't touch you, he said. It roots itself into the world and it drinks liang blood, life force, and a little of the soul out of every living thing inside its reach that doesn't belong to the temple. Then it feeds all of that to its monks. As it grows, it drinks faster. Faster growth, more reach, more drinking. Tian shook the fan. Tsk, tsk, tsk. The consequences get quite serious. I looked at him for a moment. You're a monk. Naturally, that's different. How is that different? A monk is a monk, he said, entirely unbothered. And I am me. I founded Buddhism. So we're different. I put my cup down. Then go clean your own house. Tian squinted at me and looked genuinely puzzled that I'd suggest it. Why? What do I get? Tian shrugged. I don't do things that don't benefit me. Besides, and he stopped and pointed straight up with the broken fan, the will of heaven and earth, watching him, always. I have never worked out how much of that was true. The Great Hanging Temple's survivors spent the next year trying to build an alliance against Baifan Temple, and they were right about everything, and it made no difference whatsoever. Wei old monk in red robes with a red staff came through every major power in the dynasty and made the same speech, and it was a good speech. The Baifan lotus roots itself into the world and drinks the blood power of every living thing that isn't a Baifan monk and feeds it to the monks. Right now, it can be stopped. Let it turn from a phantom into a real thing. Let its roots spread past White Lotus Prefecture, and this dynasty faces a genuine catastrophe. Tian came to us. Sun Ren approved the audience, wrote the character for permitted on the petition, and filed it, and did nothing else. Lu Jun explained why to the room, and it was the correct analysis, and I hated it. Our decision doesn't matter. Only the Emperor's decision matters. If he stops his war to burn the temple, we can afford to join. If he doesn't, if he uses the distraction to take Qingcheng instead, then we can't. And the Emperor thought about it and said the honest thing out loud to his minister. Bai Fan Temple and that lotus are genuinely evil. Stopping the war to burn them out might be a good option, but I'm more curious about the other one. What happens if I use this to press Ching Cheng harder instead? Because the first two powers the lotus would reach were the K family and the Luo family, not him. Tian said that part too. The Luo family took 3 prefectures in a handful of years. Between them and a temple full of monks, I consider the Luo family the greater threat. Tian also had somebody standing behind him, and that conversation is the most frightening one in this entire story. The emperor asked, out loud, whether the Bai Fan temple might eventually get out of control, and a voice answered him out of an empty hall, old, dry, amused. Little fellow, you still underestimate the foundation of our Feng family. What do you think has kept us on this throne for 1,000 years? The army? Sheer scale? A laugh. No, our own strength. We have met chaos like this dozens of times since this dynasty was founded, and every single time the Feng family has come out the other side. Don't concern yourself, handle your own affairs. Dozens of times. That is a family that has watched demon monks and foreign empires and dying prefectures come and go for 1,000 years, and files them under weather. That is what was sitting behind us the entire time while we were busy with everybody else. I did not learn about that exchange for years, and when I did, I sat with it for most of a night. So the alliance came to nothing. 3 major powers stayed out, and once 3 stay out, everyone stays out. And the red-robed monk kept walking from door to door for a year and a half getting polite tea from people who had already decided to die later rather than fight now. The logic was universal, and I heard it from 6 different mouths. If it really goes wrong in the end, we all go together. What's there to be afraid of, with so many people going down alongside you? Feng Lin and the branch's grand elder came to me practically vibrating about it, and it took me a minute to work out that they weren't frightened at all. They were excited. Brother Luo, do you know that when a Baifan lotus dies, it produces a seed? I did not. White lotus seed. A spirit medicine that carries so much life energy, it can change a person's constitution outright. It can take an ordinary man and make him heaven-defying. It changes talent. And I sat there with my tea going cold in my hand and thought about a boy in a barracks bay with a body like a cracked kettle. I did not say anything about that. What I said was cold water, and I said it deliberately. Bai Fan Temple is one of the 3 demon monk powers of Buddhism. They openly unified an entire prefecture. They planted one of the most evil things in the world in the middle of it. Do you two believe they have no cards? Do you believe the seed is sitting on a shelf? They deflated. And if you ask other branches for help, what's the price? There's no harmony between branches at the best of times. Under the temptation of a white lotus seed, how many do you think you'd come away with? 2? 1? None? They went away to think about it, and I sat alone in the courtyard for a long time afterward, heaven-defying, change a man's talent. Ziyu had never mentioned it, not once, in all those years, in all those trades. That was the first time I seriously wondered what else he'd decided not to tell me. While all of that was happening, an egg hatched on my table. I'd forgotten about it mostly. It had come out of the Guan family's inheritance ground years earlier, gray-black and covered in patterns, and it had sat in my storage ring being an egg. That afternoon, it started rocking. The shell cracked, then split, then came apart entirely, and what climbed out of it was a wet gray bird about the size of my fist with eyes the color of purple gold. Void came out of my chest to say hello. The bird, an hour old, still damp, took one look at that flame, drew itself up to its full ridiculous height, and started screaming at it. Because Void had, at some point while that egg was sitting in a drawer, tried to eat it, and apparently the thing inside had been paying attention the whole time. Void hovered there for a second and then retreated back into my chest, and I want to be clear that the strongest spirit flame I had ever handled was visibly embarrassed. Then the bird looked at me, decided I was its parent, and set itself on fire, purple gold flame, over its whole body, from a creature that had been alive for under a minute. The temperature in my courtyard jumped. That was a beast fire at the very top of the yellow grade, one step off the tier above, as a birth defect. Void wanted to eat it immediately. I said no. If Void ate that flame, the bird would either die or spend the rest of its life crippled, and I had a policy about things that lived in my house. Shall I give you a name? It tilted its head. Little Gray? It stared at me. Gray Feather? It stared at me. Fine. Black Feather. It stared at me. It has stared at me for years. To this day, I have never once known what is going on behind those eyes, and I have made peace with it. I offered it tea because it was looking at my cup. It stuck its whole face in, took an enormous gulp, and then froze. Both eyes went perfectly round. Its eyelids twitched. It forced the mouthful down with visible effort, turned its head away from me, and started shrieking in what I can only describe as betrayal. Fine, I said. You don't have to drink it. Sun Jingyi met it a few days later at the chess table. She'd gotten good by then. Not good enough. She has never once beaten me. but good enough that losing had started to make her sulk properly, which I took as a sign of health. Blackfeather came down onto my shoulder mid-game and she lit up like a festival. "Oh, Tien's adorable!" Blackfeather immediately puffed itself up and set itself on fire to establish that it was, in fact, terrifying. And then she stood up and came closer, and that cold she carries, the cold that arrives before she does, the cold that has its own opinions, rolled out ahead of her across the stones, and the bird flinched. Not much. It leaned back on my shoulder and pulled its head in and very deliberately looked somewhere else. She stopped. Her hand was still out. She put it down. Nobody said anything for a moment. "How's the Bing Shin technique coming?" I asked. "Quite smoothly," she said. She'd reached bone refining by then, on a technique rated far above her, in a body that should have died at 7. Ordinary cultivators 2 ranks above her would not have wanted to fight her, and she was standing in my courtyard being flinched at by a bird. "Another game," I said. "Right now." She looked up so fast she nearly knocked the bowl over. We had played exactly 1 game a day for 4 years, and she knew it and I knew it. She lost that one too. Qing Cheng fell that autumn. The third prince, Han Hongli, sat in his palace and asked his commander whether there was really nothing left to try, and his commander shook his head and didn't say anything out loud, which was a kindness. His own ancestor came for him at the end, one of the Feng family's hidden ones, thin, white-haired, standing in the doorway of a hall in a prefecture that had 3 days left. "What are you thinking about?" "I think I've lost." Wasn't this ending obvious? It was obvious. And then the prince's voice went. "Old ancestor, I'm not reconciled to it. I'm not. You were given the opportunity, you didn't take care of it." The old man was already turning around. "That's how the world is. Come on. Time to go home. That seat has nothing to do with you anymore. From here it's a fight between 2 other brats." And he took him home, like collecting a child from a party, and Qing Cheng kept operating for 3 more days under a commander nobody had ever heard of. Because the man who owned it had never really been running it. Then the gates went down, and everybody moved at once. The emperor's men poured in. Han Qingyao, the second prince, who had spent this entire war standing very still with 2 prefectures and a great deal of patience, moved in behind them and started grabbing territory as fast as his cavalry could ride. And Meng Quan went in with 500,000 armored men and did not take a single city, not one. Tian marched past towns with open gates. Tian marched past supply depots. Tian walked his army straight across a collapsing prefecture, ignoring everything at a steady pace in one direction. Tian was extremely unhappy about it, and he asked why, and Jia Fan answered while fanning himself. "The patriarch wants balance. 3-way balance is the most stable shape there is. The Feng family will do genuinely insane things for that throne. So rather than adding a strip of land to a family that already has plenty, slow the emperor down and let the second prince take most of Qing Cheng, then those 2 hate each other permanently." Meng Quan chewed on that for a mile. "And if it doesn't work, then we lose very little. When your territory is already large, more territory barely moves your strength. That's what the patriarch is thinking." Now I want to tell you about a man named Liang Jie, because I have always felt slightly sorry for him. Tian was the emperor's best general, purple gold armor, a sword with a cold edge, and the kind of quiet competence that his own soldiers looked at the way other men look at a load-bearing wall. Tian was standing on the wall of a city of 1 million people when his deputy brought him the reports, and he made his deputy repeat them. "The Luo family's army has not stopped once. They have not attacked a single city. They walked past resource depots without slowing." "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain, General." Tian sent the man away and stood up there alone at noon with the sun hammering down and a breeze that didn't help, and turned it over, and turned it over. Is there something inside Qing Cheng pulling them? Something worth more than cities? And then he looked at the map in his head and found the answer. And it was so simple that it took him an hour to see it. They weren't marching towards something in Qing Cheng. They were marching toward him. Tian called his deputy back and whispered it and watched a man's eyes go round. "Ride to His Majesty, now. If I'm wrong, no harm done. If I'm right, it's very bad." Tian wasn't afraid of us. That's the part I like about him. Head-to-head, on open ground, he'd have taken the fight and expected to win it. Tian understood something worse. If the Luo family parks itself in front of the imperial army during the exact 3 weeks it takes to swallow a prefecture, then the emperor gets nothing, and the second prince gets everything, and the shape of the dynasty changes permanently. Tian was completely correct, and the warning arrived in plenty of time, and it did not help at all, because that's the thing about an open conspiracy. The emperor could see it. Tian could see all of it, and the second prince could see it too, and did not care because it was making him rich. We stood in front of the imperial army for 3 weeks and did not fight, just stood there. And every day, Han Qingyao took more of Qing Cheng. Elsewhere, Jiangnan Prefecture, the other big grain producer, quietly sold itself. They went to the Ke family and offered their entire territory for cash. so they could take the money and leave the dynasty entirely. The head of the Qi family listened to their envoy's polite framing about mutual assistance and then took him apart in about 4 sentences. You're not helping the Qi family. You have nowhere to go. You want out of this dynasty and you want to be paid on the way. The Luo family, the emperor, and the second prince would simply take your land. We're the only ones who'd buy it. So say what you actually came to say. The envoy stopped being composed after that. When the news reached the emperor's palace, he shouted at his minister for a while about the Luo family, which is the only time on record he lost his temper. Tell me what they want. Why is it me they're set on? They left an entire prefecture unclaimed to get in my way. What do they gain? Kaibo kept his head down and said absolutely nothing, which is the correct move and the reason he outlived everybody. The emperor worked it out on his own about a minute later. They're using the throne as bait. They're using it to put my second brother permanently on the other side of me from myself. Tian said it twice more, quietly, and then, into an empty hall. The Luo family, you are really something. And on the last day, when Han Qingyao had taken most of Qingqing and it was time to leave, Sha Fan suggested one more thing before we went home. The second prince had a man behind him, and I want to give him his due, because he was the only person in that war who was playing my game. His name was Jiang Shu, scholar's robes, a face out of a painting, and the manner of somebody who has never once raised his voice because he has never once needed to. When Han Qingyao hesitated over betraying a prefecture that had just publicly submitted to him, Jiang Shu cut him off mid-sentence. The world is like this. It is cruel. If your highness genuinely intends to sit on that throne, there are things you must be ruthless about. Then, immediately, if your highness trusts me, I will handle all of it. If your highness does not, I will leave at a word. That is not advice. That is a man holding a door open and daring you to walk through it. And the second prince walked through it every single time. Jiang Shu also read our entire strategy correctly, out loud, months before anybody else did. Tian explained to his own prince exactly why the K family would eventually have to attack us whether the emperor helped them or not. Front blocked by the Luo family, back blocked by a temple, nowhere to grow. Your brother didn't create that. Tian only accelerated it. And then he asked Han Qingyao what he intended to do, and got the honest answer. Throw the dynasty into chaos. The more chaotic it is, the more chances I get. There is one more thing about that man, and it's the only soft thing in this whole section of the story. Once, and only once, Jiang Shu asked his prince whether he was certain he wanted to keep walking this road, because it would be arduous, and it would not stop. It was the first time he ever asked. It was also the last. Whatever the answer had been, he was going to follow it. Han Qingyao had pulled him out of something years earlier. I never learned what. And by his own accounting, he would otherwise have been a handful of yellow earth in a field somewhere. I have never had that. Everybody around me is paid. I noticed the difference. I want that on the record. Give them a battle on the way out. The second prince's grip is still loose. Tian'll want more time. Meng Quan sighed and said, fine, one more time won't change anything. Then he bombarded an imperial army with talismans made by his own grandfather until the formations came apart, and charged the gaps and took somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 men out of the emperor's order of battle in an afternoon. The emperor heard about it and went through astonishment, then fury, then something worse and quieter. The Luo family, it's the Luo family again. And privately, alone in that hall, he passed sentence. Other families can survive. Tian could be generous with other families, but the Luo family would be exterminated entirely, root and branch, with nobody left. Then his third brother walked in, the one who'd just lost everything, the failure, the one they'd hauled home like luggage. Imperial brother, you look pale. In this place, you address me as your majesty. You called me brother, so I must be your brother. Tian was smiling the whole time. 300,000 men in a single afternoon, morale in the ground. You won't be organizing an offensive any time this year. And what a coincidence. My second brother's grip on Qingcheng is still loose. So what will you do? Stand here and watch him finish taking it, and then watch him push your army out? The emperor's face got worse with every sentence. Oh, and, if I remember correctly, you were the one who broke open the gates of Qingcheng. You spent years and an enormous amount of blood forcing that door, and every single thing behind it went to my second brother, and you got nothing at all. Tian tilted his head. That's rather tragic. Shut up, I am telling you to shut up. A loser? Yes, I'm a loser. The third prince walked toward the throne. You hold 2 prefectures. You are the strongest man in this dynasty. And you have been outmaneuvered by the Luo family over and over and over again. So tell me, how much better than me are you? And the emperor could not touch him. Kill your own blood in the Feng family and you're out of the Feng family. And then the throne goes straight to the second brother. So he sat there and took it. That is the single most useful thing that ever happened to us, and we didn't do it. We just made the room where it happened. Around then, Blackfeather learned to make fun of people. Void ate 5 Black Crow flames, 50,000 low-grade spirit stones worth, which is a house, which is several houses, and came back a fractional shade stronger, and I said what any man says at that price. You are a bottomless pit that eats spirit stones. And Blackfeather, from my shoulder, pointed one wing at Void and did the exact headshake I'd just done, with the exact tired little sigh in front of both of us. Void's flames doubled their flicker rate. The courtyard temperature jumped 10 degrees. The message was not subtle, and it was aimed at a bird. Say that again, and I will eat you like I ate those 5. Blackfeather did not back up an inch. It also did not say anything else because it is stupid, but it is not that stupid. I had to calm down a spirit flame and a bird at the same time, in my own house, in the middle of a dynastic war. The 3rd generation ephemeral flower pill came out that season. 1st generation burned lifespan and potential. 2nd burned only potential but locked the ceiling forever. The 3rd burned potential at twice the efficiency and, this is the part I was proud of, left a crack in the ceiling. Enough that if someone worked hard enough and got lucky enough, they could break their own limit later. I gave it to a new intake of 33 Shadow Guard recruits. 22 survived, a third of them died on the spot, and the improvement was worth it. And I wrote both halves of that sentence in the same ledger on the same line. 17 at organ refining, 4 at the middle stage, and 1 more. Tien was standing at the back, hunched. White hair, white beard, dark spots across his hands, thin as a coat on a nail. Way old man, in a Shadow Guard intake. Those pills don't age anyone anymore. I'd taken that out 2 generations ago. Which meant he had walked in here that old and volunteered and survived a 3rd generation dose at the peak of organ refining with blood refining not far off. Interesting, I said. Very interesting. Every Shadow Guard I had ever seen was young. That is the entire nature of the thing. You do not get old in that yard. You get out or you stop. His code name was Bing. It's a bird. A poisonous one. I made him the 3rd commander of the Shadow Guard on the spot and went home wondering whether he'd chosen the name because he was full of poison or because he'd been fed it. And then I decided I didn't care as long as he was useful, which is a sentence I have said about a lot of people. The K family bought Jiangnan Prefecture, 3 prefectures now, and then everything got interesting at once, because the Shu family of Wanshan, the ones with 10,000 divine horses, the ones we'd pointed at the K like a loaded crossbow, suddenly had a problem. The K had 3 prefectures and a grudge and nowhere else to expand, so the Shu family sent an elder to us. My patriarch sends me to seek an alliance with the Luo family, he said. For this, the Shu family offers 1,000 ink jade kirin. Lu Jun didn't even look up. Wei alliance? Are you sure it isn't protection? The elder stopped talking. The K family holds 3 prefectures. Your family has 1. Your family made an enemy of them at our suggestion, which we both remember. You did not come here as an equal. Say the word you came to say. They settled it in an afternoon. Protection, yes. But the Luo family stands above the Shu family, in writing, and not 1,000 horses, 5,000, and not the gelded kind. 300 years of monopoly, over in one meeting, because a man's son died in a winehouse. They agreed. There was nothing else on the table. 4 prefectures. And then, in the middle of all of that, I went out to buy a snack. That's not a joke. I'd been in the compound too long. You can feel it. A kind of staleness in the head that no amount of meditation fixes. So I told the empty air behind me that we were going for a walk, and Zhou Meilin appeared and fell in 3 steps back, and I went out through my own front gate like a person. The street was loud. Candied hawthorn. Buy your candied hawthorn. Beggar's chicken? Get your beggar's chicken. Sugar figures. Sweet and fun. You'll regret it if you don't buy one. I stopped at the hawthorn stall. I had not eaten one of those since I arrived in this world. 20-some years. It occurred to me standing there that I did not have any money. I had spirit stones, and you cannot buy a stick of candied fruit with a spirit stone. Or rather you can, once, and then the man closes his stall and moves to a bigger city. Zhou Meilin produced a note of paper currency from her storage ring without being asked. Our own currency, incidentally. The Luo family issues it, and it's backed by grain, and it circulates across 4 prefectures, and it had entirely replaced the coupons the merchant houses used to print. That happened while I wasn't paying attention the way most of my empire did. I bought 2. Then I walked about 10 paces and turned around. You have one. She looked at the stick. She looked at me, and she swallowed. I watched her do it, and shook her head with an expression of absolute discipline. You really don't want it? She shook her head again. And there was something in her eyes for about a quarter of a second that she had no idea was showing. Fine, fine, I said. Stop refusing. And I put the thing in her mouth. She went rigid, genuinely startled. I have watched that woman put a knife through a man's heart without changing her breathing, and a stick of candied fruit got a reaction out of her. Then her eyes narrowed slightly, and she started chewing, and a very small, very rare, entirely accidental smile happened on that face. "There we go," I said, and turned around and kept walking, because if I'd looked at her for another 2 seconds, she'd have gotten her expression back. The outer city had changed more than the inner. My memory of it was from the demon monk years, broken, sagging, full of people waiting to die politely. Now it was crowded and loud, and the buildings had second floors. Sunren had done that. I'd never once said so to him, and that is precisely when I felt somebody watching us, and the somebody was doing it wrong. There were 2 of them in an alley mouth, a young man in extremely good clothes, and behind him a thick-necked middle-aged bodyguard with a faint smell of killing on him. The bodyguard was the smart one. "Young master," he said quietly, "something's off about that old man. Maybe we leave it." "Is he strong?" "No." A pause, and the man's face did something complicated. "That's the problem. Tien isn't anything. My gut says don't touch him, or something unexpected happens." The young master looked past him at Zhou Meilin, who at that moment was walking 3 steps behind me, eating a stick of candied hawthorn with her cheeks full. "Do it." They came over. Tien opened with a smile. "Let's make a deal." "A deal," I said. "What deal?" Tien pointed at her. Just pointed, the way you'd point at a horse. "I want her. Name whatever you want." I turned around and looked at Zhou Meilin, who had stopped chewing and was watching him with an expression I can only describe as professional interest. "Master," she said indistinctly around the hawthorn. "Shall we?" "No rush. Because, and I want to be honest, this had genuinely never happened to me. 20-some years in this world and nobody had ever tried to buy anything off me on the street. I was curious. "Anything?" I said. "You can get me anything?" "Anything at all. In Qingxi City, there's nothing I can't arrange." "Then bring me the head of the Luo family," I said. "Sun Ren, I'd like to see him. Would that be acceptable?" The temperature of that conversation changed instantly, because this boy, and his name was Mo Tian, was the son of Mo Jianjun, the man who stood at Sun Ren's right hand and handed him the Shu family plan. In Qingshi City, in the territory of the Luo family, the Fang family was very high indeed, and nobody, ever, in his entire life had made a joke at his expense. "Old man, are you making fun of me?" His bodyguard was going pale behind him. "Aren't you afraid?" the boy said. "Aren't you afraid those words get you killed right here?" "Killed here," I said. "You can try." Then we stood there, and I understood that we were both waiting for something. Tien was waiting because he wasn't actually stupid. Way old man alone who talks like that either has something behind him or is insane, and either way you want more muscle before you find out which. I was waiting because I'd already felt Sunren coming, at speed, with a large number of people. The muscle arrived first, 3 meters tall, a face like a bag of bricks. The ground shook when he walked, which is not a metaphor. I watched dust jump off the flagstones, organ refining, middle stage, and thick enough to be worth twice that in a fight. Some minor family had given him to the Fang family the way you'd give someone a hunting dog to buy favor. "Kill the old bastard," Mo Tian told him. "Keep the woman alive." Zhou Meilin swallowed her mouthful and looked up at me, and something moved behind her eyes. "Master, shall we?" "I don't think it'll be necessary." The big man came anyway. Tien was almost polite about it. "I'm sorry," he said to me, with the tired face of a man who has done this before and does not enjoy it. "If I had a choice, I wouldn't. But you shouldn't have provoked the Fang family." And then somebody started screaming from up the street. "Stop! Stop!" Mo Jianjun came around the corner at a dead run. His face was purple. His breathing was wrecked. Tien was a senior official of a 4-prefecture power, and he was sprinting down a public street like a man whose house is on fire. I could read both halves of his expression from 30 meters. Terror, because of all the people in this city, his idiot son had picked the old ancestor of the Luo family. And rage, because of all the possible sons, he had this one. "Father," said Mo Tian, delighted. "You're here." His father hit him. One open hand. The boy came off his feet and traveled several meters and landed hard, and there were teeth on the flagstones. "Father, what are you doing? That old man insulted the head of the family." "What am I doing?" Mo Jianjun's eyes were red. His face had gone somewhere his son had never seen it go. "What am I doing? I am asking you what the hell you are doing." And that was when Sun Ren arrived, and stopped, and bent almost double. "Old ancestor," he said out of breath. Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Sun Ren let out a breath that had about 10 years in it, and Mo Tian, sitting on the ground with blood on his chin and one hand on a swelling cheek, looked at the head of the Luo family bowing to the old man he had just tried to have killed. And I watched the color go out of his face in stages, top to bottom, until even the red handprint went gray. I went home. It had rather ruined the shopping. I never found out exactly what happened to that boy, because I didn't ask, and because Sun Ren handles his own house. Knowing his style, dying comfortably would have been a gift. The Fang family drifted out of the inner circle over the following year. Not dramatically. Nobody was punished. They were simply, gradually, not in rooms anymore. That's how it works at that level. There are 1,000 talented men in 4 prefectures. There is exactly one old ancestor and exactly one family that offended him in a public street. I went back and looked at my spirit field that evening, mostly to calm down, hundreds of spirit roots, all thriving. And in the middle of them, that unnamed seed from the Guan inheritance ground, which had sprouted at some point and was now the size of a finger, emerald green, wrapped in a haze of spiritual energy, radiating so much life force that the plants around it had started outgrowing their own manuals. The concentration of energy in that plot was rising, on its own, without me feeding it anything. That is not what a semi-spirit field does. A semi-spirit field is a hole you pour spirit stones into. Mine had stopped needing the stones and started producing. Is it because of you? I asked the sprout. Then I laughed and shook my head, because who cares? It was going in the right direction, and I have never once demanded that good luck explain itself. Meanwhile, the Qi family was being eaten by its own allies, which took 2 years and was extremely instructive. They had 3 prefectures. On paper, they were a great power. In reality, they were in a box, the Luo family in front of them with 4 prefectures, Bai Fan Temple behind them with a lotus that got bigger every month, and no direction left to grow except through us. So the emperor sent his best minister to make them an offer. Kai Bo walked into the K family's hall and opened with flattery about how relaxed the K patriarch looked for a man in his position, which is the sort of thing you say when you intend to be unpleasant later. The offer was clean. Take Wanshan Prefecture off the Shu family. The emperor will hold the Luo family's attention while you do it. Then, once you have it, hit the Luo family. When their gates come open, the emperor takes Luoshan and Chengguan, and Changping goes to the K. The K patriarch thought about it for a long time and said yes. Tian knew it was a bad deal. That's what I like about him. Tian knew Changping was the worst of the 3 prefectures, and he knew what he was being used for, and he said yes anyway, because the alternative was sitting in the box until the lotus reached him. And Kaibo walked out into the corridor and thought, in as many words, the K family is a knife aimed at the Luo family, a tool you throw away after. All 3 Luo prefectures go to His Majesty. Nothing goes to the K. Way open conspiracy. Heh, as if the Luo family were the only people who could do that. Then, after Kaibo was gone, one more person stepped out of the shadows of that hall. Way old man in a blood-red coat with his face in shadow. Shiguo Hong. The ancestor of the K family, who had not been seen in public in living memory. And what do you intend to do about all this? And the head of the K family, a man who had just negotiated as an equal with the emperor's own minister, turned around and bowed to him with genuine fear. Other things can be considered, he said, but we must take the Shu family of Wanshan. We absolutely must. The war for Wanshan lasted 6 months, and I mostly watched it through reports. They came with 800,000, and then more, and eventually more than 2 million men stacked up outside the border cities of Wanshan Prefecture. We were on defense, we had the walls, and we had a granary that could feed a war for 3 years. Lu Jun's advice to Sun Ren was one line. Wanshan cannot be lost. We're defending. Let's find out what price the K family will pay for a chance at survival, and what price the emperor will pay to hurt us. The answer, in both cases, was very high. In 6 months, the K family lost more than 500,000 men and moved their line forward by nothing. I read those reports every week, and after the first month, they stopped being reports and started being a study in how a thing dies. 2 million men outside a border city, supply columns running day and night, medicine, armor, replacement horses, all of it flowing forward into a line that did not move. Their own elder eventually gave the patriarch the number that mattered, and it was not the casualties. Our reserves are under 1/3 of what they were. Food we still have. Everything else is running out. If it isn't replaced, we collapse on our own without the Luo family lifting a hand. They asked the great Yan dynasty for supplies. Just supplies. You won't move against the Luo family. Fine. Send medicine. Great Yan sent nothing. That is the moment the K family actually died. Not in a battle. In a room, when a man read a letter and understood that his allies had been waiting for exactly this. We lost under 10,000. And the emperor, who had promised to press us and hold our attention, staged a few showy skirmishes on our border and did nothing else at all, because a K family and a Luo family grinding each other down was exactly the result he actually wanted. The Qi patriarch's own elder said it to his face in the end, and there was a bitter kind of laugh in it. His Majesty agreed to cooperate. What has he actually done? Stacked troops on a border, a few small clashes. There isn't one cultivator at organ refining in those units. That isn't pressure, that's theater. Tian isn't helping us fight the Luo family. He's watching the 2 of us bleed. They were correct, and they kept fighting because they had nowhere else to be. Sunrin read the casualty reports every week with his tea and never once gloated in front of the staff, and gloated enormously in private. And I know because I have heard him do it through a wall. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I taught a child to play chess properly. Sunjingi was ahead, genuinely ahead. For the first time, she'd taken a corner and built it, and there was a smile on her face that she was trying to keep off it. Old ancestor, your turn. I could see the whole thing. She'd taken the immediate profit every single time, and every time it had been the right move, and she had built a beautiful position that could not survive one stone in a place she had never once looked at. I put it there. She stared at the board. Life is like a game of Go, I said. Sometimes you can't be greedy about what's right in front of you. Keep your eyes far out, otherwise one wrong step and you lose the whole board. She sat there a very long time, then she let a breath out. Old ancestor, I lost again. I poured her tea, my tea, the real one, the one that comes from the main sect, that I do not offer to people. You seem unsettled. Drink first. This one's good. I don't give it to anybody except you. She held the cup in both hands and narrowed her eyes exactly the way I do, because she'd been copying that since she was 7, and took a careful sip. Well? She hesitated. Old ancestor, do you want the truth or a lie? What's the lie? The lie is that this tea is wonderfully fragrant, that it settles the mind, and that drinking it lets you clearly perceive the passage of time and the changes of the world. I nodded, satisfied. That is in fact exactly what it does. That's why I buy it. And the truth? The truth is that it tastes like water, she said, with almost no flavor at all, and a faint bitterness at the end. There was a silence under that pavilion. We looked at each other. Are you certain, I said, that you haven't got those two the wrong way round? I wish I had, old ancestor. But, and she stopped there, which is the most tactful thing anyone in my family has ever done. She went off to practice, because with the Bing Shin technique you cannot ever really stop. That technique is a race. The cold comes for your heart whether you run or not, and if you run fast enough you survive it and get stronger, and if you slow down, you become a very beautiful statue. She has been running since she was 11. I drank the rest of her cup after she left. It's good tea, I told the empty courtyard. It isn't nearly as bad as that little one makes out. Then I went into seclusion for 6 months. Not for cultivation. My cultivation was fine. I was at the peak of blood refining and had been for 2 years, and no amount of liang in the panel moved it by a hair. That's the wall. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Every rank up to that point is a purchase. Transcending mortality is not for sale. You cannot buy it with your family's blood, or with divine medicine, or with 100 years of anything. The only currency it takes is state of mind. So I sat in an open courtyard with my hands on my knees and my eyes closed and did nothing at all for half a year. Sun Jingyi came to the door several times, saw it shut, and went away without knocking. Sun Ren came once with something that mattered and got turned back by a shadow guard with the same sentence every time. The master is in seclusion. Unless it concerns the survival of the family, it waits. Tian had to make every major decision of that half year alone. And he made them, and most of them were right, and I have never told him that either. On a morning in autumn, something in me finally let go. I can't describe the breakthrough properly, and I've stopped trying. The closest I can get is that for 6 months I had been sitting still, and at some point I stopped sitting still and started sitting inside the time itself, the passing of it, the way a season leans into the next one, the way a life is a thing that happens at a specific speed, and then all that solidified blood energy went back into my body, and I opened my eyes and the courtyard looked different, not brighter, more detailed. I could see the individual motion of dust. I could hear 4 separate conversations in the compound and follow all of them. I could feel, very faintly, where every person in that building was standing, transcending mortality, the last realm of the mortal 5. Half a step into immortality, they call it, and having taken it, I can report that the half is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The first thing I did was brew tea. 6 months sitting in one spot, sensing the flow of time and the changes of the world, and not one mouthful of tea in any of them. I poured a cup and smelled it properly before I drank it, like a man who's been away. There it is, I said, exactly as good as I remembered. You came out. Ziyu was sitting across from me. Tian had not been there a moment earlier, and I had not felt him arrive, and I have never once managed to. And your cultivation broke blood-refining perfection. Tian was squinting at me with the fan half raised, and for the first time in 20 years he was not smiling. You've actually surprised me. It's the last rank of the mortal realms, I said. Half a step to immortality. Emphasis on half. Tian put the fan down. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Then he told me. And it is the only time that man ever gave me a straight number without making me play him for it first. Cultivation families with 1,000 years of inheritance, 10,000 years, 100,000. The odds of one of them producing a single transcending mortality in a generation are under 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. 1 in 10,000 is considered respectable. Tian picked up my teapot and drank straight from it, which is a thing he does. And for an ordinary person, ordinary family, 1 in a billion would be a good year. Then what happens to everybody else? They're kept. Tian shrugged. The talented ones get the resources and the training. The ones who can't reach it get sent out to run the family's businesses, and if they don't want to do that either, the family feeds them anyway, forever, on one condition, which is, marry widely, have many children, and if you can't raise them all, the family will raise them for you. I sat with that for a while, because that is my panel, that is the exact shape of my cheat, arrived at independently by every powerful family on this continent, without any panel at all. They worked out the same equation I got handed for free, that a bloodline is a resource, that more people is more strength, and that the cheapest thing in the world is a relative. They just don't have a number that tells them how much they're taking. I'm not sure whether that makes them better than me or worse. Then Ziyu emptied my second teapot as well, and I gave up and gave him the cheap stuff, and he brightened immediately. Now this one's better. Fine, I said. If you say that one is better, that one is better. And then he stopped drinking and pointed the fan at the horizon. Your Bai-fan temple, he said. It's different than it was. I turned and looked, and I could see it now. That's what the new rank actually bought me, more than the strength. From my own courtyard, 4 prefectures away, I could see countless white roots, fine as hair, longer than distance ought to allow, spreading outward from White Lotus Prefecture in every direction, slowly, patiently, like frost going across a window. 6 months. That was 6 months of growth. The more Liang blood, life force, and soul it drinks, Ziyu said, the faster it grows, and the more solid it becomes, until it stops being a phantom and starts being an object in the world. That's when the seed forms. Tian tapped the fan on the table. If you ever intend to deal with that temple, this window is the best one you will get. After this, it only gets worse. I looked at the horizon for a long time, then I went to pour myself another cup and discovered he had finished that pot too. The Qi family broke that winter, and it wasn't us who broke them. They'd taken help from outside the dynasty, a neighboring empire called the Great Yan, whose crown prince had been accepted as a disciple by an actual immortal sect, and who therefore behaved the way people do when they think they have an untouchable relative. Their envoy came to us first, incidentally. I want to tell that part, because it is my favorite thing Sun Ren ever did. Tian arrived in yellow, a young palace official with a voice pitched high and a face powdered too pale, and he opened by asking whether the Luo family intended to cooperate with the Great Yan dynasty, or to treat the Great Yan dynasty as nothing. Cooperation isn't something I decide alone, Sun Ren said, unhurried. But if your terms are excessive, then frankly, you're dreaming. The envoy asked him to repeat that, and then he gave a speech. It was quite a good speech, actually, and I've had it recited to me twice. Above blood refining is transcending mortality. Above that is the immortal realm. Perhaps in a place like this, an organ refining cultivator seems strong to you, and a blood refining cultivator seems invincible. Behind my Great Yan dynasty stands the 5 elements immortal sect. One wave of their hand and your family is ash. That we are offering you cooperation at all is a gift. I would advise the head of the Luo family not to be ungrateful. Sun Ren listened to the whole thing. Then he asked a question, and it is the single best sentence anybody in my family has ever said. The 5 elements immortal sect is indeed very strong. What does that have to do with the Great Yan dynasty? And what does it have to do with you, a eunuch? Does your dynasty speak for the will of an immortal sect? Do you? Will one word from your mouth bring an entire sect out of seclusion to march across a continent to erase a family of mortals? Tian set his cup down. Does that seem reasonable to you? And then he laughed, out loud, in the man's face. Because Sun Ren had worked out the actual relationship, and he was right. To an immortal sect, a mortal dynasty is a machine that delivers spirit stones. If the machine breaks, you get another machine. Nobody crosses a continent for a broken machine. The envoy went white, and then red, and then said, "The Luo family, is it? Very well, I'll remember you." And turned to leave. "Leave?" said Sun Ren. "Where do you think you're going?" The envoy spun around with his chin up, and behind him the air distorted, and out of it came his trump card, a death warrior the Great Yan dynasty had spent years and a fortune raising, at the late stage of organ refining, more than enough to walk out of a room full of mortals, and the space behind that man distorted as well. Bing came out of it. There was one flash of cold light. A head came off. Blood went across the room. The envoy didn't understand what had happened until he felt something warm on his face and put his fingers to it. "We've torn off the pleasantries," Sun Ren said, sipping his tea. "You didn't seriously expect to walk out of here alive?" The envoy started shouting about the Five Elements Immortal sect, about the Great Yan dynasty, about how Sunren was digging his own grave, and my nephew let him finish because there was no reason not to, and then had the hall cleaned. Tien walked out into the corridor afterward with his hands behind his back and permitted himself one observation. Well, these are certainly turbulent times. I watched the whole thing from my courtyard with my divine sense, and I will admit I was startled. I'd assumed he'd stall, negotiate, keep the door open, do the sensible thing. Tien killed the man in the first meeting. Good. That saves a great deal of trouble. It also creates a great deal of trouble. The Great Yan dynasty went to the K family instead, and the K family, starving, boxed in, out of options, said yes, and refused for a full year to let Great Yan troops onto their soil, and then finally, when the aid was cut off to teach them a lesson, said yes to that too. Great Yan soldiers came into K territory. Within weeks they held every city, every army, and every road. And the Qi family's own ancestral city had been renamed after their benefactor. The K patriarch put it best, alone, to his grand elder. I used to believe that bringing in the Great Yan dynasty was our only road to life. Now I can't tell anymore whether it was a road to life or a road to the grave. 3 prefectures gone, in about 2 months, without a battle. That's what an ally does. And then Bai Fan Temple started sending monks into my house. Not many at first. 2 or 3 in the outer city, in white robes with lotus flowers embroidered on them, walking around looking at things. Then a dozen. Then they were in the inner city. They stopped at the walls of the Luo family compound. Every single one of them. They would come to the street outside and go no further. And I never found out whether that was orders or instinct. One of them came in anyway. Tien got about 40 paces before the shadow guard put him on the ground and dragged him underground, and I let him sit there for a week because I was curious what he'd been sent to do. Then I had him brought up. A withered old monk in white robes with lotus flowers on them in 10,000-year black iron shackles brought into my courtyard while I was having tea. Tien put his palms together and gave me the most benevolent smile I have ever seen on a human face. Amitabha, excellent, excellent. Benefactor, you have a karmic connection with the Buddha. Would you be willing to enter my order and save the millions still suffering in this world? And then he lit up. A sacred white radiance came off him and filled my courtyard, and with it came the aura of the 4th realm. And I understood the entire plan in 1 second. Tien had been at transcending mortality the whole time. Tien had let himself be caught. Tien had walked into my compound alone and allowed himself to be shackled and thrown in a hole for a week so that he could be brought up in front of the head of the Luo family and reveal at close range exactly what he was. It's a good play. Pretend to be a pig to eat the tiger. Get taken inside the walls. Get taken to the one person who matters. And then stop pretending. Tien opened his hands and pulled. The shackles creaked. The shackles did not break. Tien tried again, and this time the phantom of an enormous white lotus rose into the sky behind him, and his strength went up past transcending mortality on the spot. That's their art. They call the lotus down, and it lends them power for a short time, and the wind came up in my courtyard and blew the tea cold. Open! There was a crisp clang. The shackles rang, and settled, and held. His face went red. The veins came up in his neck. Tien looked at the shackles and then at me, and his eyes were full of an enormous number of questions. How? How is this possible? This is impossible. I want to explain the shackles, because he never got the explanation, and I've been carrying it around ever since. They are not artifacts. There is nothing special about the design. They're 10,000-year black iron, folded and compressed by an old man who had once tried and failed to skin a creature he couldn't scratch, and who had therefore spent an unreasonable number of years learning to make a cage that could hold a thing stronger than himself. They will hold blood refining at any stage. They will hold perfection. They hold transcending mortality, and I know that now, because I tested it on a volunteer. Blackfeather woke up on the roof from all the shouting and came down onto my shoulder, tilted its head at the withered monk who was straining and steaming in the middle of my courtyard, and screeched at him once, lazily. "Quiet, sweetheart," I said, and rubbed its head. Then I put the cup down. "Tisk," I said. What a pity. Because he was strong, genuinely. In his own realm, with that lotus behind him, he was very close to invincible. And he had thought his way into a hole in the ground with his own hands, in order to be clever at me, and the only thing he had failed to account for was the tensile strength of a pair of shackles. Tien pretended to be a pig to eat the tiger, and ended up simply being a pig. "Take him away," I said. So I went to see it for myself. I'd been running an intelligence service for years, and I still knew nothing. The shadow guard tops out at blood refining, and there is only so far you can send a man who can be killed by what he's looking at. I made a longsword for the trip. Ordinary spirit artifact, except that it runs on spirit stones instead of on me. You set it, you stand on it, and it flies, and you only need to steer. Blackfeather flapped down onto my shoulder as I was leaving. "You're coming too?" It tilted its head and said nothing, which is its entire personality. 3 hours in the air, the world underneath compressed into a map. And at the border of White Lotus Prefecture, I stopped and stood on that sword in the sky for a while, looking. I had heard about the Bifan Lotus for years. Everyone had a description. None of them were any use. Because the thing about actually seeing it is that it doesn't look evil. It looks holy. There is a white light coming off it that you want to walk toward. And standing in the sky 4 kilometers away with no part of it touching me, my heart started going wrong and the skin on my arms came up in goose flesh. It gets into your head. That's the mechanism. Not fear, invitation. I took 3 deep breaths and put a layer of Liang blood over myself and the feeling backed off. Then Black Feather made a noise and set itself on fire. And the purple gold flame came off it and spread over me until I was standing inside it, and the pulse stopped. Completely. Well, I said, you're useful. I patted its head far too hard and flew into the prefecture. Here is what it's like inside. The air is full of eyes. There is a white mist in the void that comes and goes. And everywhere, over the fields, along the roads, through the streets of the towns, there are white roots hanging in the air. They come down into people, into the backs of their heads, right there in the street, walking to market, carrying a basket, with a white root going down into the skull like a stem into soil. And every single one of them is smiling. That's the part I still see. They all have the same expression, a gentle, pleasant, faintly warm smile, and it is so obviously not theirs that you could pick it out from 100 meters. I stopped in front of a mother and daughter to test something. They walked straight into me and didn't see me. The flame was hiding me completely, not from the people, from the roots. They went past, and the mother's foot caught nothing at all, and both of them went down on the stones. Hard. They got up and kept walking. And a few paces later they fell again, the same way, over nothing. There were cuts on both of them by then, on the hands, on the knees, layered over older ones, and what came out of the cuts was not red, it was white, the purest white I have ever seen. And they got up smiling and kept going, and I stood in that street and watched them until they turned the corner. I've done a great many things. I have tested pills on prisoners, and I have poured my own family into a bar on a screen, and I have never once pretended to be better than I am. But I did not do that. And whatever else is true about me, I decided something standing in that street, and I have never revisited it. The temple is in the center of the prefecture, and the lotus hangs over it, and the roots go out from there to everything. I stood on a high point and counted monks, skin refining, bone refining, organ refining, hundreds of them, all wearing that same face. And then, from somewhere inside that temple, something looked at me. I felt it arrive across my whole body at once, transcending mortality. Early stage, a whole rank below where I was standing. And I did not move, and neither did he. Because here's the thing nobody outside that realm understands. Between 2 cultivators at transcending mortality, no amount of advantage is certainty. Everyone at that level has spent decades assembling things nobody has seen. I had a fistful of them in my ring right then. So did he. And underneath him was a lotus that had been eating a prefecture for years, on his ground, where every stone was his. Neither of us knew what the other was holding. That's the whole reason nobody moved. Black Feather went rigid on my shoulder and made a small, unhappy sound. Don't worry, I said. I'm here. Tien can't touch you. It shut its eyes and leaned into my hand. I was going to visit the temple, I said, to nobody. I suppose that's off. And I left. The abbot came out onto the spot where I'd been standing about a minute after I'd gone, and he stood there looking at empty air for a long time. I know what he said afterward because I made it my business to know eventually, and it's the highest compliment I have ever received. His disciple asked whose faction I belonged to, whether I was with the dynasty or a wandering cultivator or something else, and the old monk said none of that mattered. What matters, he said, is that in a cultivator of my own realm, I felt an extreme crisis and an aura of death that I have not felt in a very long time and which has become unfamiliar to me. That disciple had never heard his master say anything like it. His master could fight above his rank. His master could handle late-stage cultivators. And his master had just described an old man standing on a hill as a thing to be survived. They cancelled the plan to expand within the year. That's what my visit actually accomplished. I never fought them, I never threatened them, and I moved their entire timetable by standing on a hill for 4 minutes. Fear is cheaper than war. It is also much harder to arrange. I flew home in a mood I couldn't name. Not heavy. The situation was nowhere near heavy yet. The great Yan dynasty sat between me and that temple and would sit there for years. But I kept thinking about the roots in the backs of their heads. The white blood. That smile. I am not a good man. I have never claimed it, and I never will. But it turns out there's a line in me somewhere. And I found it by accident in a street in a foreign prefecture, and it's this: I do not farm people. I take from them. That's different, and I know exactly how thin the difference is, and I have thought about it more than I'd like. I got home and sat down under my own pavilion and found the tea had gone cold hours ago. I drank it anyway, and Xiao appeared beside me and said, Master, Sunbo is out. I put the cup down. That little one is out? Xiao does not lie to me. None of them do. It isn't loyalty, it's that lying to me has a very well understood price. So it was true, and I still asked, because part of me had stopped expecting it years ago. 3 to 5 minutes later, there were 2 figures crossing my courtyard, and one of them was wearing a black coat with the hood down and his face in the shadow of it. I had a picture in my head of that boy, 9 years old, wooden sword, that specific childish stubbornness that has no plan behind it, only refusal. What walked up to my pavilion was something you would notice in a crowd and then deliberately not look at again, something that came off the wall of an alley behind you. There was a cold in the air around him that had nothing to do with cultivation and everything to do with the room he'd been living in. Tian gone in at skin refining, middle stage. Tian came out at body refining, early stage. I want to explain why that number matters, because on paper it's nothing. It's the second rank of 5. Half the servants in my house are past it. Li Guocheng got there by swallowing pills and complaining. Sunbo got there with the worst physical talent Xiao has ever assessed, in a body that absorbs less than a third of anything you put in it, in the single most lethal environment I own, without 1 gram of preferential treatment beyond a roof. That is not a rank. That is a man arguing with the shape of the world for years and moving it by an inch. I pointed at the seat across from me. Sit. Tian sat the way you sit in someone else's house, back straight, hands on his knees, head slightly down. How are you feeling? It's all right. That was it. That was the whole answer. Tian'd forgotten how to talk to people. In that yard, nobody has a name, nobody asks questions, and speaking at the wrong moment is a category of mistake with only 1 correction. So we sat there in silence and drank tea, and I let it go on a long time because I had nothing to fill it with that wasn't worse. Then I asked the only question I actually had. What do you intend to do now? Keep chasing strength? Keep cultivating? Keep rowing against the current and carve out a road in this world that's yours? And he looked up, and the whole thing came out of him at once, and I don't think he'd said any of it out loud before, to anyone, ever. If I can, then of course I want to keep going. Then he stopped, and a smile happened on his face that had no happiness anywhere in it. But reality is much crueler than I imagined. Talent decides what a cultivator gets. Talent decides where he stops. I've done everything I could do in that place. I have been between living and dying more times than I can count, and all of it took me from skin refining perfection to the very beginning of body refining. Tian was gripping his own knees. Old ancestor, I want strength. I want to cultivate. I want genuinely to carve a road that belongs only to me. I want to keep going. I want it so much. And then his voice went somewhere quieter, and it was much worse. But I've started to waver. If I keep going like this, will I actually see a result? Will any of it ever return anything? If I keep holding on, will I get even one of the things I want? I did not answer that immediately, because there is a lie available in that moment, and it is very easy to reach for. Of course you will. Keep working. Hard work always pays. Every elder in every family in this world has that speech memorized, and every single one of them knows it's a coin they're passing off. I poured myself another cup instead. These things are hard to say, I said. People's ideas are always beautiful. Reality is always cruel. Tian didn't move. A genius, 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, will still meet someone stronger before he's finished growing, and die, and turn into a handful of dust that nobody thinks about except the people who loved him. That happens constantly. That's the ordinary outcome for extraordinary people. I set the pot down. And a mediocre man, or a man with poor talent and a poor foundation, does not necessarily end lower than a genius. In this world, besides talent, there is opportunity, there is luck, and there is the nature of a man's heart. All 3 matter. All 3 are indispensable. Tian was staring at me now. So here is the summary, and it's the only honest one I have. Talent is fixed. It was decided before you were born, and nothing changes it. Everything else, is moved by what a person does. I picked my cup back up. The process will be complicated, and tedious, and difficult, that's all. Tian sat there completely still for a long moment, the way people do when something has been rearranged. Then he came back to himself and started to say something, and I had already poured him a cup and pushed it across the stone. My tea. The real one. 3rd person in my life to get offered it. His face when he registered which pot it came out of was worth more than the tea. Try it. Tell me how it is. Tian picked it up carefully in both hands, took a small sip, and closed his eyes and actually paid attention to it, which is more than Ziyu has ever done. It took him a long time to swallow. Well, slightly bitter, he said. And then after the bitterness, there's something sweet underneath it. Tian thought about it more. And it settles the mind. Everything around me seems to have gotten quieter. No, that's not right. Not the surroundings. My heart seems to have gotten quieter than it was. I nodded, extremely pleased with myself. That is exactly what it's for. That is the entire function of that leaf, and it costs more than a house. Then he glanced at me and hesitated and did the thing he has always done, which is refuse to lie to me even when lying would be free. It's good tea, but I don't really like the bitterness. So. And he stopped there. Tian could have said something flattering. Tian knew perfectly well what the correct answer was. And he had decided, somewhere in that yard, that a man who told him the truth about his own death when he was 9 years old was owed the truth about a beverage. I pursed my lips. Fine, I said. I stood up to go for a walk before I said something sentimental. And then I stopped, and came back, and put my hand on his shoulder. If you want it, I said, then go after what your heart wants. Who knows what the future holds, and even if in the end you get nothing at all, at least you tried, didn't you? Then I walked off into my own courtyard. That is not what I had been going to say. What I had been going to say was that there is a thing called a white lotus seed, that it grows in the corpse of a bifan lotus, that it carries enough life force to rewrite a person's constitution outright, that it can take a man with no talent and make him heaven-defying, and that there is one growing 4 prefectures away over a temple full of monks. I didn't say it, because it isn't certain. The temple has cards. The seed may not exist yet. It may not be reachable. And there is nothing crueler you can hand a person who has spent his whole life failing than a hope with a hole in it. Tien went back to his corner of the compound and started swinging a sword. I went and sat by my spirit field and did arithmetic that had nothing to do with spirit fields. Ziyu came back a few days later, wanting 100 liang and blood pills. 100, I said. 100. Last time it was 20, and you argued me down from 50 to 20 over the course of an afternoon. That was last time. I want to describe how that negotiation actually went, because it is the purest example of that man's character. Tien opened at 50. I said no. Tien said 40. I drank tea. Tien said 30. I drank tea. Tien said 20 and made an expression indicating that 20 was the absolute floor of human decency, and then immediately said out loud, I could go a little lower, which is not a thing a person says. That was the first negotiation. This one he opened by putting a ball of purple flame on my stone table. Earth grade, high quality, spirit fire born from the essence of heaven and earth, not from any beast. The kind of thing that appears in a catalog once a generation with a price in top grade spirit stones that reads like a joke. It tried to run the instant it was uncovered. It got nowhere, and inside my chest, void went absolutely insane. Black Crow flames had been rationed for 2 years by then. The main sect had noticed I'd bought over 20 of them at the alchemist's discount and quietly capped my allowance, which is the most polite way anyone has ever told me to stop stealing. Void had been on short commons and sulking about it in a way that a fire should not be able to sulk. And here was a spirit flame 2 full tiers above anything it had ever eaten, sitting naked on a table. If that's the offer, I said, then 100 is not out of the question. I asked who they were for, because liang and blood pills are for mortals. Tien is not one. A new disciple, he said, touching his nose, which is what he does when he's about to be evasive in a truthful direction. Unusual physiology. Those side effects you're so careful about? On him, nothing. Where an ordinary person needs a year between doses, he needs a short seclusion to digest, and then he can take the next one. I stared at him. You found someone, I said slowly, who eats divine medicine like candy. It's not as exaggerated as you're making it sound. It was exactly as exaggerated as I was making it sound. Tien got his 100 pills 3 days later. I got a spirit flame, and Void aided in my courtyard with a sound I am not going to describe, except to say that at one point it was very hard to tell whether the noise was burning or something asking for help, and that it stopped fairly quickly. Afterward, Void came back to me weaving in the air like a drunk and settled into my chest 2 tiers stronger and slept for a week. Blackfeather came down to investigate, tilted its head at the staggering flame and got completely ignored and was visibly offended about it for days. The sect had its own war going, and this one had teeth. 3 families run the alchemy of the Wandan sect, and one of them, the Qin, walked out. They took nearly a third of every branch on the continent with them and founded their own sect on the way out the door, which meant that for the first time in living memory, the main sect had a competitor. They went to war over the pill market the way merchants do, which is to say they both cut prices until neither of them could stop. Pills across the continent fell to under half of what they'd been. Every alchemist in the world got poorer. Every cultivator in the world got stronger. Our own branch's income dropped by half in a season, and we survived it only because I'd built 3 other revenue streams out of boredom. And then a small family in the southern wilderness who had spent generations selling cheap pills in the corners of the market that the Wandan sect couldn't be bothered with quietly started taking whole provinces. Fenglin brought me that news practically bouncing. Because if that family survives, everyone else comes out of the walls. Every alchemist family that has been squeezed flat for 1,000 years is watching to see what happens to them. And he asked me the question he'd been circling for years in a low voice after checking the courtyard twice. Brother Luo, if the main sect keeps weakening, if more powers start breaking their monopoly, Tian swallowed. Should we get involved? I had been waiting a very long time for somebody else to say it first. Because here is what I actually thought every single day, for years, and never once said out loud. We are both Wandan sect. Why are you the main sect and I am a branch? Why am I the one being milked? Why does an organization that does nothing take 30% of everything made by every alchemist under its name, forever, on the grounds that it was there first? We talked for 6 hours that night. We went through the whole thing, the timing, the sequence, what we'd need, what would have to be true. And at the end of it, I told him the same thing I told him about everything. Not yet. Grow first. When you're weak, the Wandan sect's signboard over your door is genuinely useful. Tian nodded and went home to build. And I want to note because it becomes relevant to nothing at all except my own amusement. The reason we could survive a 50% collapse in pill prices was a set of side businesses, recording stones, talismans, sold through channels I'd rather not detail. And one more thing. Xu Feng finally finished his life's work. The skinny nephew with the eye bags. The one I caught in the library with a beginner's alchemy manual and an unrepeatable ambition 20-some years ago. Feng Lin delivered the news with a completely straight face, and it took me an embarrassing number of seconds to understand what he was telling me. The boy had built a pill that raises fertility in cultivators, who are notoriously, famously bad at having children, and more importantly, raises the talent of the child that results. Not by much. Enough. I sat there doing arithmetic that I want you to follow carefully. More children. Better children. Every one of them a Luo. That skinny idiot, who had been laughed at by an entire branch sect for 2 decades, had built the single most valuable thing anyone in my family has ever made, and he had built it for the stupidest possible reason, and he had gotten there first. I told Feng Lin to bury it, completely. Not one pill sold, not one word outside the branch. Because the moment that formula surfaces, the main sect takes it and pays us in protection, and we stay a branch forever. Held quietly, it is the card we play on the day we stop being one. What a pity, Feng Lin kept saying, shaking his head. What a pity. Tian was thinking about spirit stones. I was thinking about the fact that my nephew had accidentally invented a way to make my own cheat grow faster, and had done it by being a pervert with an alchemy license. Some men are born to greatness. Some men wander into it sideways while everyone is laughing. The lotus came into the world on an ordinary afternoon, and Blackfeather told me first. That bird stands on the highest point of my courtyard, on one leg, staring at the horizon for hours at a time. It has never once made a noise up there. That day it screamed. I looked where it was looking, and the sky in the direction of White Lotus Prefecture was full of white tentacles. Not the fine hair-thin roots I'd seen from the border. These were thick, and there were thousands of them, and they were spreading toward me across the whole width of the horizon like a hand opening. Before, those roots had been phantoms, half real, visible for minutes at a time, and only inside their own prefecture. So it's done it, I said. It's turned from illusion into substance. It has actually descended into the world. 2 weeks later, the temple raised an army. I'd expected monks. What came out of White Lotus Prefecture was worse than monks. They were people, farmers, laborers, city guards, men and women who had been walking to market with roots in the backs of their heads. And now they walked in columns, without armor, without discipline, without any fear of death because there was nothing in there left to be afraid with. They did not stop for wounds. They did not stop for anything. They walked at whatever was in front of them and kept walking into it until one side ran out. They went for the Great Yan dynasty first, because Great Yan held the old K territory and shared the longest border with the temple. I watched from 4 prefectures away with a cup of tea and a very clear understanding that I was watching my own future. Ziyu turned up in the middle of it, which was becoming a pattern. You know about this, he said. I'm not blind or deaf. Then you know that after the Baifan temple finishes the Great Yan dynasty, its strength goes up enormously in a very short time. And you already have the Imperial Feng family sitting behind you watching, so next you get pressure from both sides at once. Tian shook the fan. So what's the plan? I shrugged. Meet force with force. Meet water with earth. What else is there? Oh? Tian raised an eyebrow. So you're not afraid of dying? I laughed at that. It came out easier than I expected. Of course I'm afraid of dying. Everybody is. Even you. I put my cup down. But if the only people who want me dead are the Imperial Feng family and a branch temple in White Lotus Prefecture, that's a little naive of them. Am I strong by the standards of the wider world? No. Am I confident that inside this dynasty I am invincible? Yes. Tian looked at me for a long moment with a completely unreadable face. That confident. Then he ruined it, the way he always does. I should say, it isn't that I mind you dying exactly. It's that if you die, my supply of liang and blood pills goes with you. Tian brightened. So why don't you write the whole thing down in advance? The refining process, the method, the formula, all of it, in detail, and give me the notes. And ideally the blood-colored spider lily as well. What do you think? Tian said this with genuine hopefulness. Get out. Tian was completely unbothered, squinted at me, fanned himself, smiled. Don't be reckless. I'm only thinking of safety. And then he told me the thing I actually needed, which is how that man's entire relationship with me works. Tian extracts something ridiculous. I throw him out. And on the way out, he hands me the single most important piece of information I will get that year. There's something you should understand about that lotus. The reason it's called one of the most evil things in the world isn't the drinking, it's the second half. Tian stopped smiling. Everything it takes, blood, life, soul, from every puppet under every root, it can push most of that instantly into the monks of that temple. I set my cup down very carefully. You're currently confident you can hold their transcending mortality and take a slight advantage, he said. Fine. Now suppose that Lotus pours everything it has collected into him at once. Are you still calm? Are you still ahead? Can it push him past transcending mortality into the immortal realm? Tian grinned, showing me a mouth full of yellow teeth. What do you think that flower is? An omnipotent divine object. One small realm. Two at the very most, briefly. That's the ceiling for the lotus in that prefecture. Then, mildly, bring in other lotuses with more puppets under them, and the arithmetic changes. I thought about it. 1 or 2 small realms, temporarily, on his own ground. If that's all, I said, then the temple isn't much of a problem. Tian looked at me the way you look at a man who has just done a sum out loud that you can't see the working of. Are you sure? Are you certain you won't capsize in a ditch? Are you sure you don't need help? Then he named his price for that help. And I want to be precise about the escalation, because it's the whole joke and the whole point. First visit, 1 blood-colored spider lily, then 20 pills, then 100, and now, sitting under my pavilion with a broken fan and a stolen pot of my good tea, he offered this. Get me 1,000 or so liang and blood pills, and I'll deal with Bai Fan Temple for you. Make it 2,000, and I'll clean out the Imperial Feng family while I'm here. Tian topped up his own cup. Oh, and there's the great Yan dynasty as well, isn't there? For 2,000, I'll throw them in free. Tian winked at me. Well? After the temple and the royal family are gone, this entire territory is essentially your family's. Tempted? I did the sum in my head. Every blood-colored spider lily under my courtyard, harvested to the last stem, root and all, killing the crop permanently, 2,000 to 3,000 pills, maximum. That old man had just offered to solve every problem I had in exchange for literally everything I owned. Hey, I said. Never mind then. Don't trouble yourself over the temple, or the Feng family, or the great Yan dynasty. The Luo family will handle it ourselves. A look of genuine disappointment crossed his face. What a shame. Tian stood up. If you change your mind, tell me any time. Tian got 2 steps away, assuming I'm still around, and vanished. I want to note something about that conversation that I only understood later. Tian didn't come to sell. Tian came to check on me, and he made it sound like a sales call because the alternative was admitting he'd flown across a continent to see whether an old man was going to survive the year. That is the closest that man has ever come to affection, and he charged me a pot of tea for it. So I went shopping in my own basement. I hadn't been down to the Red Chamber in a long time. The origin ghost was where I'd left it, lying against the wall of a cage forged from 1,000-fold compressed iron, with no eyes and no food and no water and no visible intention of dying about any of it. It lifted its head when the teleportation formation flared. It turned 2 empty sockets toward me and held them there. That's all it can do now. It's the only thing it has left, and it does it every single time. You've gotten much quieter without the eyes, I said. Then I looked at the crop. Over 500 blood-colored spider lilies. On a floor that had been ordinary stone 20 years ago and was now dark red all the way through, in a sealed room 100 meters under my own house, growing a divine rank spirit medicine that exists in exactly one place on this continent, fed by the aura of a thing that fell out of a formation nobody built. Cut all of it, and I could refine 3,000 pills tomorrow, which is the arithmetic of a man who drains a pond to catch the fish. And I did not come this far to be that man. I took a few dozen mature stems and left the rest. And then, on my way past the cage, I noticed something I want to record, honestly. There was a moment when I considered killing it, not for any reason, not for a resource, just because it had been looking at me for 20 years with an expression I've never been able to fully read, and because, at transcending mortality, I could finally do it. I had not been able to scratch that thing at blood refining. I could kill it now. I checked. I went upstairs instead. And then I spent a year filling a hole with everything I could make. Because Ziyu was right about one thing. My cultivation had stalled. From the middle stage of transcending mortality to the late stage is not a matter of a few years. The panel had gone quiet on me, and no amount of liang in the bar moved it, and I had finally arrived at a place where my own cheat couldn't help. So I stopped trying to grow and started trying to arm. Array discs. Over 100 of them, each one holding a complete formation ready to deploy in the time it takes to open a hand. Materials for talismans, the high-rank kind that carry real weight, not the little ones I used to throw around by the thousand. I laid in enough to make tens of thousands of them, and if I was careful with the failure rate, over 100,000. Pills, two types only, the ones that restore what a fight takes out of you, and the ones that raise you for a short time without leaving anything behind. And one more thing, which I'd been working on for a while and which I'd never told anybody about, because it's the sort of thing that changes how people look at you. A single-use spirit artifact. You throw it. It goes off. The yield scales with the spirit stones you pack into it. It requires almost no liang blood from the user, which is the entire point. I can hand one to a man at bone refining, and he can deliver the full attack of a cultivator at transcending mortality once, and then he needs another one. I made a great many of those. And then I got greedy with the process the way I always do, and tried to build a bigger one. And it went wrong in the middle of the refinement. The cauldron went red. The lid started rattling. White smoke came out of the seam, which is the universal sign that you have wasted a week and a fortune. Failed then, I said, and sighed, and reached for the lid to clear out the slag, and stopped. Because I'd swept the inside with my divine sense a moment earlier, and it had been ruined material, and I swept it again, and what was in there was not ruined material. I opened the cauldron. What came out of it was a wave of black light and something underneath the light that made the hair come up on my arms. Mine. My arms. In my own courtyard, holding my own cauldron. Blackfeather came off the roof screaming and beat its wings hard enough to knock a cup over. Void came out of my chest without being called and spread itself over my whole body in a sheet of flame, trying, and I want to be clear that this is what it was doing, to shield me from something that had just come out of a pot I was standing over. It's all right, I told them both. It's fine. The thing inside was a black sphere about the size of my palm, perfectly ordinary looking, no energy signature at all. You could put it on a market stall and nobody would look at it twice. If I activated it, the release would be at least the full attack of a cultivator at the perfection stage of transcending mortality. Possibly considerably more. That's a rough estimate, and it stayed a rough estimate, because I have never tested it and I am not going to. I tried to make another one and could not. Not once, in dozens of attempts. My grasp of artifact refining simply is not deep enough. I bought 2% of alchemy off a panel 20 years ago, and I never bought this at all. So there is one of them in the world, and it is in a ring on my hand, and I would very much like to never find out what it does. Around the same time, Sun Ren decided he was tired. Tian wasn't old. His cultivation had risen enough that he'd hold that seat for another 20 years easily. Tian was simply tired, in the specific way that a man gets tired when he has read 4 prefectures worth of paperwork every morning for 2 decades. His own son would have been the answer. Wen Tao had a better instinct for governance at 20 than his father had at 50. But Wen Tao had left years ago to join the Firesword Immortal sect to learn a formation he'd read about in a book and could not stop thinking about, and had made a disciple of a grand elder there, and had sent home exactly as many letters as you would expect from a man who has gone to a place where a decade is a short seclusion. So Sun Ren asked Lu Jun who the best of the next generation was. Li Guochang. Sun Ren made a face like a man biting a lemon on purpose, because Li Guochang's talent was genuinely first-rate, top 3 or 5 in the whole family. And Li Guochang's approach to life was that if he could lie down, he would not sit. If he could sit, he would not stand. And anything that could be postponed until the final possible moment would be. Tian had reached organ refining and stopped there, and stayed there, and would have stayed there forever if I hadn't come around every few months to threaten him. You think I chose him for his cultivation? Said Lu Jun. Then why? Tian walked past my desk last month while I was stuck on the grain allocation for Wanshan. Tian glanced over my shoulder, out of boredom. Tian made 2 suggestions and then wandered off. Lu Jun picked his brush back up. I sat with them afterward. Both of them worked. His instinct for administration is better than mine. It is probably better than yours. So they summoned him. Li Guocheng came into that room with the expression of a man walking to a scaffold. Tian knew. Tian had been summoned by the head of the family exactly 4 times in his life, and every one of them had been terrible. It's nothing serious, Sun Ren said, smiling with his eyes almost shut. I've noticed you don't have much to occupy you. So from tomorrow, you'll come here every morning and learn to handle the affairs of this family, inside and out. How does that sound? There was a silence. Can I refuse? What do you think? Tian tried. Tian genuinely tried. Tian got as far as opening his mouth twice. Then Sun Ren delivered the closing argument. And it is the funniest sentence in my family's history because it is completely sincere. Honestly, it isn't as bad as you're imagining. Most matters arrive already handled. You only write approved or rejected, and if you'd like, you can add a note on the ones you reject and they'll do it again until it satisfies you. Tian gestured at the room. Also, you'd be sitting in a chair drinking tea while you work. Isn't that easier than cultivation? And Li Guocheng, who was doing arithmetic of his own, had to concede that it was. What about the old ancestor? He tried. I'll speak to the old ancestor myself. Sun Ren came to my courtyard that evening, bowed at the entrance the way he has done for 30 years and never once stopped doing, and asked my opinion. You're the head of the family. Decide it yourself. I poured tea. That boy is never going to give cultivation his full attention. Given the choice between him doing nothing at all and him doing something, let him do something. At least his youth won't be wasted. Then I looked at him standing there and noticed something I'd been ignoring for years. Would you like a cup? That. Tian actually hesitated. May I? I poured it before he could talk himself out of it. Tian took it in both hands and drank it properly, in small mouthfuls, eyes half shut, and when he put it down, his face had changed. Good, he said. Good tea. Tian is the only person in this entire family who has ever said that and meant it. Li Guocheng, meanwhile, went and found the one person in the compound he could complain to. Sun Bo was in his corner, shirtless, swinging that sword the way he does, one, and Li Guocheng leaned against the old tree and explained the disaster. They want to groom me as the next head of the family. Tell me what kind of nonsense that is. Sun Bo actually stopped, put the sword down, started thinking about it seriously, because that is who he is. Somebody he considers a friend had brought him a problem, and problems are for solving. Then Li Guocheng added the detail he'd left out. Oh, and the patriarch discussed it with the old ancestor. And the old ancestor agreed. Sun Bo picked his sword straight back up, turned around, and walked to the middle of the yard. Hey, what are you doing? Practicing my sword, said Sun Bo, without turning. Weren't you helping me? You didn't mention that the old ancestor knew about it and agreed. One swing. If it were only the patriarch's idea, there would be a solution. Another swing. Since the old ancestor has agreed, this problem is unsolvable. Find somebody else. Li Guocheng stood there with the expression of a man who wants to cry and can't find the equipment. Then he brightened, all at once, and started laughing to himself, because he had just thought of something. Tian was going to be the head of the family, which meant that one day he would be the person who decides how the family's work is distributed, which meant he could gather an enormous number of extremely talented people around himself and have them do it. Tian walked off cackling. Sun Bo watched him go with real concern, and I know exactly what he was thinking because I was watching from a walkway and I was thinking it too. The grief has finally gotten to him, poor man. And then the Qi family died, and not one of us worked out who did it. They weren't a power anymore. They'd handed everything to the great Yan dynasty 2 years earlier. The land, the armies, their own ancestral city, and in exchange, they'd gotten the only thing they'd wanted by the end, which was to stop being important enough to attack. For 2 years, the Qi family lived quietly in the middle of a war and had, by every account I ever received, the most peaceful time they'd had in a generation. Then one night, a red light came up over their compound. People on the street outside stopped and pointed. Somebody said it was probably the patriarch experimenting with a formation. Somebody else said that whatever it was the Qi family's business, and staring at a great family's business is how you stop having your own. They dispersed. That's the whole reaction. A red light over an entire clan district, and a dozen people looked at it and then went home. By morning, there was nobody left inside, not a survivor, not one. Every person carrying the Qi name in a compound sealed from the inside and above it. Several witnesses agreed on this, and none of them would repeat it twice. A blurred figure sitting cross-legged in the air. Sun Ren brought me the report and asked who I thought had done it. The great Yan dynasty, he said. The Feng family, Bai Fan temple. Any of the three could have. All of them had reasons. Tian also considered us for about 4 seconds and then dismissed it. Not out of loyalty, but because there was no profit in it, and he had correctly observed that I do not do things that don't pay. Tian ordered the family's defenses raised a level and went back to his tea. I want to tell you what actually happened in that compound. Because I found out, and because it is the single most instructive thing in this entire story. The K family had an ancestor, Shi Guohong. Tian founded that clan. Personally. Centuries ago, as an ordinary man with no cultivation at all, he had built a family from nothing. And then he had raised it, generation after generation, patiently, carefully, arranging good marriages and good conditions, growing the bloodline wide and deep and healthy. And he had done all of it from the very first day, for one reason. Tian was stuck. Blood refining, perfection stage, one step from transcending mortality. And he had been standing on that step for over 50 years. His talent had a ceiling, and he had hit it, and no amount of work was going to move it, so he had spent centuries growing his own clan, the way you grow a herd. Every child born under that name was a deposit. Every good marriage was an investment. Every year of prosperity was another year of interest on a debt they didn't know they'd taken. And when he finally moved, he did it in a single night, and he broke through. Tian came out the other side at transcending mortality, standing in an empty compound, several hundred years of patient farming converted into one rank. And the thing that made him do it early, the thing he was actually angry about, was the lotus. Tian wanted decades more, another century, ideally. Let the family grow wider, let the bloodline get better, harvest a bigger crop and break through further. But Bai Fan Temple's roots were spreading toward Xunyang, and once they arrived, every person in that clan would belong to somebody else's harvest, and centuries of work would be gone. After centuries of planning, he said to himself, alone, on a cliff outside the ruins of his own family, I not only filled the gaps in my talent, I broke through in one stroke. And then, immediately, it's just a pity about my bloodline. Another few decades, and I could have gone further. It was that Bai Fan Temple. They very nearly ruined a plan of hundreds of years. How hateful, truly hateful. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. Not one word about the people. Not one. Somewhere in that compound, there were children he had held. Tian had picked the marriages that made them, and what he felt, standing over the results, was irritation at being rushed. And here is why I've told you all of that in such detail, and why I keep turning it over, because I know exactly what he was. Tian had a bloodline he grew on purpose to convert into personal strength. Tian kept his family healthy and fed and reproducing because healthy fed reproducing families produce more of what he needed. Tian arranged their marriages with an eye on the yield. There is one difference between that man and me. Exactly one. I never emptied the bar. That's it. That's the entire moral distance between us, and it isn't a principle, it's a rate of extraction. Tian took the whole harvest in one night. I have been taking the interest for 30 years and leaving the capital alone, and my family loves me for it, and I let them. I have thought about this more than I have thought about anything else in this world, and I have never once been able to make myself come out ahead in a way that survives contact with an honest morning. Anyway, Tian came for us next, because a fresh breakthrough is unstable, and stabilizing it takes more Liang blood. And the Liang blood of your own bloodline works best, but any large collection of cultivators will do in a pinch. And there was a family 4 prefectures away that had risen from nothing in 20-some years, held 4 prefectures, and, by his reading, obviously had no transcending mortality in it, because how could it? 20 years. Nobody produces one in 20 years. Tian walked into Qingshi City on a summer afternoon. A gate guard tried to stop him, an old man in a blood-red coat, walking straight past the queue, and got out about half a sentence before the old man simply wasn't there anymore. The guard stood there rubbing his own head. His partner came over and laughed at him and told him to spend less time at the pleasure houses if he was going to start seeing things. Shi Guohong walked up my main street with his hands behind his back, and by his own admission afterward, enjoyed himself. Because Qingshi City in high summer is spring. It has been spring for 20 years. The talismans hold it there, every day, in every season. And the spiritual energy inside those walls is thicker than outside them, and a man at transcending mortality could feel the difference the moment he crossed the line. Tian found it genuinely comfortable. Tian thought about how nice it would be to live there. Tian noted, with some regret, that the whole effect would presumably fade after he'd wiped out the family maintaining it. And the only thing that puzzled him was the talismans themselves. You cannot buy that many. No family is rich enough to buy weather. So the Luo family had to be making them, which requires an inheritance, which raises the question of where a nobody clan from a backwater found a talisman master's legacy. Tian decided we must have gotten lucky and stumbled into a secret realm. Then he decided that before wiping us out, he would take the inheritance, since it would be a waste otherwise. Tian arrived at my front gate around midday. By then, the shadow guard had been on him for 20 minutes. Tian knew. Tian had noticed them and dismissed them. And I want to be fair, he was right too. At his level, 10 cultivators at the perfection stage of blood refining standing in front of him is not a fight, it's a queue. 2 door servants told him to leave. Tian raised his head and looked at them, and both men locked up where they stood and could not move. I know this is the Luo family, he said. That's why I came. I'll be conducting my second harvest here. They went down on the flagstones shaking. Then he started walking, and every servant who came at him went down before they got within 3 meters until there was a trail of them behind him all the way to the inner gate, all conscious, all trembling, none of them able to make a sound. That's when the shadow guard came out of the walls and formed a ring. Tian looked at them and did the arithmetic out loud, and it wasn't bravado, it was accounting. Organ refining at perfection, a number at middle and late stage. The Qingxi Luo family has raised a respectable stable of cultivators. Then his voice changed. And what of it? In cultivation, the higher the realm, the wider the gap between each step. Put 100 of these in front of me, put 1,000 at blood refining, I would still kill every one of them by myself. And the pressure came off him properly for the first time. I have been told by 3 separate witnesses that it was like the air becoming a weight. The ring of shadow guards, the finest killers on 4 prefectures, every one of them with their entire future burned out for this exact job, went down onto one knee in sequence, from the outside in, like a wave. Transcending mortality, he said. Shedding the mortal world, half a step into immortality. It seems your kind still don't understand how terrifying that is. And then the pressure went away, not gradually. It fell off them in a single step, and then another step, and the ones on their knees found they could breathe and looked up. Why? Said an old man in a plain white coat, walking out of the inner gate with his hands behind his back. Why does it have to come to this? Wouldn't it have been better to leave each other alone? By the time I reached the courtyard, the last of his aura was gone from my house entirely. Tian stared at me. Who are you? Now, I want to be clear about my own state of mind here, because I have thought about it since, and I don't come out of it especially well. I was not angry. There were 50 of my people lying on the stones behind him. I registered that the way you register a stain. What I felt, and I'm being accurate, was a kind of professional interest, because it had been 30 years, and I had never once met somebody at my level who came to my house. You walk into my Luo family, I said, and ask me who I am. Doesn't the question strike you as slightly ridiculous? Behind me, all 3 commanders of the Shadow Guard came up out of the ground. Zhou Meilin, Xiao, Bing. All 3 knew exactly how large the gap between them and that man was. All 3 had already decided, without discussing it, that if it bought me 1 second they'd spend everything they had. They have never once been ordered to do that. I want that noted. Shiguhong's face changed as I came down the steps. Tian didn't know what I was. Tian knew that whatever it was, it had just erased the pressure of a transcending mortality cultivator from an entire compound by walking through a gate. Tian was quiet for a moment, and then, to his enormous credit, he immediately started negotiating. If I leave right now, he said, does your promise not to pursue this still stand? I actually thought about it. 10 minutes earlier, before he'd walked in, if he'd turned around at the gate, I'd have let him go. I don't chase things that cost more than they return, but he was already standing on my flagstones on top of 50 of my people. Do you think that's possible? His jaw set. So you won't let me leave. So, you want a fight to the death? I laughed. I couldn't help it. A fight to the death? I don't think you've understood the situation yet. And I took a step toward him and let my aura come up as I walked, the way I'd done to an elder of the Guan family a long time ago. Blood refining, perfection, transcending mortality, early stage, middle stage, and stopped there. Tian went very still, because one small realm at that level is not a small thing. It is decades. It is the difference between a man who has arrived and a man who has settled in. And he was standing in my house, where every stone had a formation under it. But he had not survived several hundred years by being brave, and he had not clawed his way to transcending mortality by having no cards. Tian put his head back and shouted at me, and the shout was mostly to cover the fact that he was buying time. 1 realm higher isn't enough for a fight to the death. Even at transcending mortality, people die from carelessness. Luo Yuanhai, are you sure? The crimson aura came off him then, in a wave, and it kept coming, and it kept coming. The sky over my family turned dark red. Above the compound, out of that mist, something enormous assembled itself. A dragon. Hundreds of meters of it, 2 ridges on the skull, scarlet eyes, coiling slowly over the heads of everyone in that courtyard. It lowered its head and looked at me. Never underestimate anyone in this world, Shiguohong said. Especially not a cultivator of your own great realm. A single moment of carelessness costs you your life. I looked up at it. I've never underestimated you, I said. But is this all you have? And then I opened both hands. Every array disk I owned went off at once. Several hundred formations, and by some counts several thousand, layered under and over and through the compound, keyed and waiting for years. Attack formations, defensive formations, and a category of thing I built specifically because I never intended to fight anything fairly. The red haze in the air came apart like smoke and wind, and the dragon began to shrink. It fought, it bellowed, it came apart from the tail forward and pulled itself back together twice and kept getting smaller. And I stood there with my hands in my sleeves and watched several centuries of a man's most treasured trump card get reduced, over the course of maybe 30 seconds, to something the size of my palm. I reached up and caught it. I turned it over in my fingers for a moment. 2 ridges on the skull. Very fine work, actually. Then I closed my hand. There was a small, crisp sound, like a walnut. The courtyard was completely silent. Tien stood there in a ring of shadow guards with his mouth slightly open, and I watched the last of the confidence go out of that man's face the way water goes out of a cracked jar. Before that moment, he had been frightened of the unknown. That's manageable. Everybody at our level lives with that. After it, he was frightened for his life, which is an entirely different thing and much harder to keep out of the eyes. What now? I said. More cards? Or will you close your eyes and take it? And he played his last real one. And it was a good one, and I have never seen anything like it before or since. Beside him, out of nothing, a gate assembled itself. 3 meters of it, blood red, ancient, covered in patterns that hurt to follow. Inside the frame there was nothing at all, not darkness, absence, a random teleportation formation bound into an artifact, portable, usable anywhere, no preparation and no anchor, 9 uses in its existence. This was the 6th. Tien looked at me over his shoulder and got his sneer back on, because that gate was worth every year he'd spent acquiring it. Luo Yuanhai, try to keep me here, try to kill me here. Tien stepped toward it. Otherwise your Qingxi Luo family will live in fear every day, forever. Tien stepped into the gate and closed his eyes, because that's the protocol. You go in, you count 2 or 3 breaths, you come out somewhere random and hopefully boring. Tien opened his eyes and was standing in my courtyard. I watched him work through it. It took him a while, and it was one of the more enjoyable stretches of my life. Not possible. The formation is random, but bounded. The one guarantee is that it never dumps you within an enormous radius of where you left, because a gate that drops you back into the room you're fleeing is not an escape tool. So either the artifact was broken, or, and then he saw what I was holding, because it was in my hand. Shrunk down small enough to turn over in my fingers the way I'd turned over his dragon. Imprinting the capabilities of a formation onto an artifact, I said, examining it, and fusing the two into one thing. That's a genuinely good idea. I turned it toward the light. It's a pity. The person you met was me. Anyone else, and you'd have been out of my sight already. Tien howled at me. Why? How? Why are you this strong? You are 1 realm above me. 1. Why? And the light went out of his eyes while he was still shouting, and then Blackfeather flew down. It landed on my shoulder, tilted its head, and stared at the strange human standing in the middle of a ring of blades. A human who felt wrong to it, which it did not like. Then it started chirping at me, and I did not need a translator. Master, master, master. Who is that? Why haven't I seen it before? Is it an enemy? Can I eat it? There was, I want to be clear, visible drool on its beak. That bird eats Yao beast meat every single day, several times a day, because that's how it maintains its body. It had never once eaten a human being, not for any moral reason. Simply because every human it had ever met lived in my house and was therefore, in its understanding, furniture. You want it? It nodded so hard it nearly fell off my shoulder. In that case, I said, we should speed this up, and I ought to show a little more of what I've got. It won't do if I can't handle one early stage transcending mortality. And I took one more step forward. The pressure that came off me on that step put a man who had eaten his entire bloodline for power onto his back foot with his legs shaking. A monster, he said. Tien wasn't talking to me. That thing can't be measured normally. Then he tried the last thing available. Tien lowered his head. Tien bent his back. Tien put himself as far down as a man at his level can physically get. Luo Yuanhai, as a fellow transcending mortality, you know what this road costs. I paid a price beyond counting to reach this realm. His voice was completely steady, which I respected. So if I said now that I am willing to submit to you, to your Qingxi Luo family, to be a dog wagging its tail at your feet, would you spare my life? And I thought about it, properly, for several seconds. Because a transcending mortality cultivator on a leash is worth an enormous amount, and I am, above everything else, a man who counts. Submit to me, I said. Yes. Since I arrived in this world, I said, the only person I have ever trusted is myself. I have never once trusted anybody easily. Tien closed his eyes. Since you have no more cards that save your life, I said, let's finish. Void came out of my chest. 2 breaths, perhaps 3. There was a black flame and the shape of a man inside it, and then there was neither. Tien didn't scream. There wasn't time to. His storage ring came off in the air and I caught it, and I stood in my own courtyard holding everything a man had accumulated over several hundred years and the last several centuries of an entire bloodline. Blackfeather made a small, extremely disappointed noise. Next time, I told it. Then I turned around to Xiao. Handle the rest. And I went inside because the tea had been sitting out for a while and I wanted to drink it before it went completely cold. Later that night, alone, I opened the ring. Pills, low grade, useless to me. I set those aside for Sunren to hand out. Talismans, a few artifacts. Some cultivation techniques of no interest. And at the bottom, a piece of animal hide so old it had gone soft. There was a map on it and a description underneath. And the description said that in a place called Langya Mountain, there is the inheritance ground of a cultivator who genuinely reached the immortal realm, and that inside it there is a divine ability of extremely dangerous character. I did not recognize the name. I recognized the terrain. It's inside the Great Yan dynasty. I'd glanced at a map of that country exactly once, years ago, and past a certain level of cultivation, a glance is enough. I put it away for later, because a technique can be written down and taught, a divine ability cannot. It is comprehended personally by a cultivator who has actually transcended the mortal world, and it cannot be recorded, and it cannot be taught, and the only way to give one to another person is to tear it out of yourself and hand it over. Nobody does that, ever, except a dying man arranging things for his descendants, which means whoever left that inheritance had known exactly how they were going to die and had done it on purpose for somebody. I'll go and look one day when this dynasty stops burning, and that, in the end, is the whole shape of it. I woke up in a chair with 7 days of life in a family that could not stop men from carting its own winter grain out of its own courtyard, while the head of the house stood in the gateway and watched, because there was nothing else he could do. And a few decades later, a cultivator who had murdered his entire bloodline for power walked up to that same gate and died on those same stones in less time than it takes tea to go cold. I have 4 prefectures, a sect branch, a divine medicine growing in my basement, a monster under my house that I have decided to feed, a bird that despises my tea, and a family so large that the number at the top of the panel has stopped being a number and started being a country. I did not get any of it by being good. I want to be extremely clear about that, since I'm the one who's been telling you this. I got it by being early, being patient, and never once emptying the bar. There is one thing left that I want and cannot buy, and it is not a rank. It's a seed. It grows in the corpse of a lotus, in a temple full of monks, in a prefecture 4 provinces from here, and there is a young man in my compound with the worst talent Xiao has ever assessed who swings a sword at nothing until he falls over, every single day, and has never once asked me for anything. I haven't told him. I'm not going to tell him until I'm holding it. But somebody else was doing arithmetic that season, and I didn't know about it for a long time. In the deepest room of Bai Fan Temple, the abbot sat on a white cushion and asked a question out loud, to what appeared to be an empty room. Do you really think the Qingxi Luo family is that extraordinary? And a small white lotus, no bigger than a palm, drifted up out of the air beside him and settled by his ear. Because that is the part nobody outside that temple knows. Once the Baifan lotus turns from illusion into substance, it doesn't only drink, it sees. It can look at a power and read the weight of its fortune, the way you'd heft a stone. The abbot listened for a while. Oh, he said. You're telling me that the true fortune of the Qingxi Luo family is not weaker than the imperial Feng family, a house that has held this dynasty for 1,000 years? The little lotus swayed. Yes. And the old monk sat there in the dark and cancelled his timetable. Tian had been about to move on us. Tian had the Great Yan dynasty nearly finished and a clear road afterward, and every reason to keep walking. Instead, he told his disciple they would lie low and digest and grow, because there was something in the Qingxi Luo family that he could not see, that his lotus could weigh, and that it weighed at 1,000 years. And because, somewhere in the back of his mind, he kept returning to a single afternoon, an old man standing on a hill outside his temple, looking at him, for about 4 minutes. Way old man in whom he had felt an extreme crisis, and an aura of death he had not smelled in a very, very long time.